Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Introverted in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 26, The Bloody Gathered Fruits. Hiruzen took a deep puff of smoke before leaving his lit pipe in the hands of a jounin nearby. He made a small smile as he adjusted his Hokage hat and then, calmly, he took the stage from Kakashi Hatake, the third proctor for the Chunin exams. "Welcome," he said proudly as he watched the 10 ninjas who had survived the second trial stand shoulder to shoulder. To the uttermost left was Naruto, his cerulean eyes settled on him with a burning gaze of determination. He couldn't help but smile at such eagerness. His teammates stood next. Danzo's failure was a pale-skinned boy who barely held himself up with the use of a crutch, probably because of his back injury. He'd need time to recuperate. Then was Sakura Harino, the civilian kunoichi. She had a fire in her eyes that won, even if she looked mildly uncomfortable and had trouble swallowing, if the grimaces she made every now and then were of any indication. It had probably to do with her neck wound. The Dakigaku kunoichi, Ryazetsu, was next. She stood tall and firm with an uptight posture. Kuratsuki of Uegaku was next, her eyes fearful and glancing towards Naruto every now and then. He couldn't help but wonder what the boy had done to make her so scared, but then again he would ask for their reports later on, through Yojao. "The exams you have partaken in," he began slowly, "are a substitute for war." Calmly, he brought up his right hand. "Each of you who passed was forced to make choices in order to survive. You have held true to your beliefs, or maybe to your comrades. You have forged alliances or backstabbed each other at night. You have fought, bled, and battled across 5 days. How did it feel? Was it something nice? Did it make you feel happy?" I hope the answer was no, he finished with a grimace. "These exams are a substitute for war, that is true, but they are not an excuse to kill or murder without cause. In the face of death, allies are the strongest bonds you can have. The loss of your teammates, the anger and the hatred you feel right now because of it must not drown the fact that you allied with other shinobi from other villages. Remember that culprits are not the entirety, but only the single individual who threw the kunai, who sliced the throat. Do not accuse the majority of the faults of the single man or woman." There was a loud sigh as the third Hokage then removed his hat from his head and made a simple but powerful bowing gesture. "I am sorry if any of you lost your precious friends to this exam." He stood back up stiffly a moment later. "But do not let that pain cloud your judgment. Understand that pain, make it yours, and then think if you would like to deliver it onto others. Would you? That is a vicious cycle that will never be broken, unless someone accepts and understands it, and refuses to rekindle the flames of war. In a month of time," he said then clearly, "there will be the final and public part of this exam. The members of the various courts around the lands of the elemental countries will converge in Konoha to watch you fight for the honor of becoming a Chunin, of becoming a higher-ranked shinobi of your village. I cannot speak for your own cage, but know this, they will be certainly as proud of you on that day, whether you win or lose, as I will be for my own ninja." He nodded towards Kakashi, who stepped forward with a small covered casket. "Come one at a time and take out a number," Kakashi drawled, gesturing to Naruto to head near him first. Naruto's number turned out to be 4. Sakura's was 1 and Sai held number 7. Kuratsuki ended up with number 5, and Ryazetsu was 9. Niji Hyuga turned out to be number 2, while Rock Lee went to number 8. Teiwa of Otagaku became number 10, and Kidomaru received number 6. Tenten was number 3. "Sakura Harino will fight Hyuga Niji," Kakashi stated then calmly. "Tenten Sato will fight Naruto Uzumaki, Kuratsuki of Iwa will fight against Kidomaru of Oto, Sai Sato will fight Rock Lee, Ryazetsu of Taki will fight Teiwa of Otagaku." There was silence as the each shinobi watched their opponent. Yojao swallowed silently. Sai was the one guaranteed an easy win. Naruto would have to sweat it, but she was sure he would pull through. Sakura on the other hand. Even training her to the death would not yield enough results in a month to put her on par with the Hyuga. Secretly teaching her techniques would not work either. Apprenticing her under a kunoichi would do nothing in that short frame of time. Literally, the pink-haired kunoichi beneath her guide was screwed even before starting. Thankfully, it seemed as if the girl had realized that too, because her eyes had already gone towards her teammates with a defeated gaze. She'd give up before starting. Nobody was going to fault her for that. She winced as she remembered the pain of a few attacks from the gentle fist style she had suffered during her umbu training. They weren't pretty at all. The Great Kanahagakure Arena will be open in 1 month, do not be late, and with those words, the Sandaime turned and left. In a moment, Jounin Sensei flocked to their respective teams, just like Yojeo did too, appearing right in front of Naruto. You did well, she began. Did the medic check you lot for toxins? Poisons? Anyone needs another round of vaccinations? She hoped her voice wasn't fussy. She was never worried about her umbu squad because they usually knew what they were doing anyway, but with children, you never knew if they took their shots or not. I'm fine, Sensei, Naruto answered back, but my teammates? I'm fine, Sakura's voice was barely hearable. It came out softly, raucous and with effort as the girl winced while talking. Hurts a lot to speak, throat itches. The medic changed the bandages and applied antiseptic, Yojeo muttered, giving a quick glance over to the girl. It's never enough. Enemies might have used poison on their weapons after all. Sigh. Do you want to try and lie about your pain too? No, Sensei, was what the pale boy muttered as he held himself steadfast to Naruto's shoulders with his other arm. I don't trust Dickless holding me too close. He might lose himself to my perfection and try and touch me. Naruto snorted. I think he's fine, can I drop him, Sensei? You will not, Yojeo remarked with a small smirk on her face. I'll have you do a full checkup at the hospital then. Let's get out of here. As she turned to leave, Naruto began to follow quietly for a few minutes, before he frowned and spun to raise an eyebrow at Sakura's still form. Sakura. Ah, sorry, Sakura's face betrayed her grief. She grimaced as she began to walk next to him. Naruto. She whispered with pain clearly visible on her features as she tried to speak. What happened, in the forest? I'll tell you later, he replied in a hushed tone. When you and Sai are both fine. Dickless, Sai quipped from his shoulder. I am fine. Right, Naruto rolled his eyes. How are we going to leave the training ground, Sensei? He asked then, as the thought suddenly crossed him. It had taken them a few days to reach the tower, how could they leave without doing the same? There's an underground river, Yojeo remarked. The above water is channeled through a pressurized tunnel. We sit on a boat and the water does the rest. We'll be near training ground 7 by the time the pressure drops. With a look of understanding, Naruto remained quiet for the rest of the trip, even though he couldn't help but feel that the gaze that Sakura was sending him meant the girl wanted to ask something else. The travel back was indeed a really short-lived thing, if only for the fact that once seated they were strapped to a few chairs and then pushed at incredible speed through a dark and damp hallway half filled with water. It was definitively a new experience, a fun one to boot, but even then one short-lived and staled by the fact he was more worried about his teammates' injuries rather than the ride. The moment his sensei grabbed hold of both Sakura and Sai, he watched her leave in a hurry to the hospital and began to instead walk that way too. He was now alone walking along the streets as the sun slowly was starting to die over the horizon once more. He hadn't had lunch, and he didn't even feel like it, but then again maybe he could bring something to Sai? He didn't know about Sakura's parents, they were probably going to be warned their daughter was in the hospital to begin with. Sai on the other hand, he had no one, had he? His mind made, Naruto began to jump quickly away from the roads and for the rooftops, before jumping down in front of his home and entering in quickly. Danzo-sensei wasn't home, and after leaving a quick note behind he was soon out once more, headed towards Hebai. He hoped they did take away. He entered the corner shop only to find it filled to the brim, with a few groups standing in queue. He bit his lips furiously as he watched the line move forward slowly. If this kept up, he'd have to stay there the entire night. If it isn't Sakura's teammate. The owner of the establishment had been making his rounds, but at his sight he simply dropped the plates to another waiter and headed over to him, grasping his hand with both of his and tightly shaking it. Well, my boy. How did it go? Ah. Kuro-san. Well, really, he stammered out, surprised by such amicability. It went well, he added. We all passed, but Sakura and Sai are both at the hospital, so. So you came here to get something to bring over there. The owner smiled brightly as he gave him a friendly pat on the back. Well done, my boy. We'll make a gentleman out of you yet. There were a few grumbles as he was literally pushed not only to the top of the line, but also beyond that. So, who else passed? The owner asked as he carefully began to select some pastries from one of the glass cases. And don't worry, this is on the house. Passing even one of the Chunin exams alive is something that needs celebration anyway. Ah. Thank you. Naruto bowed quickly and uncomfortably as he felt far more gazes than usual on his back. Well, 2 teams from Konoha passed, a Kunoichi from Taki and from IWA2, and 2 Oto shinobi. Otagaku shinobi. The owner raised an eyebrow. Oh well, must be that new shinobi village that was built in the land of rice recently. Kuro appeared thoughtful for a moment. What would you like to eat? I've gotten down Sakura's favorites and your other teammates' tastes are pretty simple. Ramen, he replied slowly. If it's possible. Everything's possible, Kuro winked at him. As long as you keep on trying. 5 minutes later Naruto was jostling 4 different plastic bags as he reached for the hospital's entrance. He stopped before setting foot inside. With his luck, they'd confiscate his food before long. He was torn, but that didn't last long. Naruto. His sensei voice reached him from a few floors above, at a window that overlooked on the main road. We're here. He nodded and smiled back, before starting to run up on the wall all the way to the window and within the sterile-looking room. He dropped the bags delicately on the bed desk, and then gave a careful look to his teammates' conditions. Sai had been literally strapped to the bed with his back upwards. Dickless, if you are having any strange ideas, kill them, he muttered as he watched him with interest. Sakura just smiled and made a small wave in his direction, before taking out a small tablet of chalkboard to write on. Can't stress my voice, doctor's orders. Hit Sai for me. No violence allowed in the room, Yojeo quipped quickly, crossing her arms over her chest. Naruto, what did you bring? As soon as his sensei asked that, Naruto felt queasy. He hadn't considered the woman when he had gone for food, but then again Kuro had been the one to give him 4 plastic bags rather than 3, was the man able to see the future or something? Going by exclusions, and keeping the ramen for himself, he had an assortment of pastries for Sakura and a strange vegetable soup for Sai. His sensei was apparently given the benefit of doubt with various pieces of cheese, ham, and fish assorted together. Sakura can't eat solid things yet, Yojeo spoke softly eyeing the pastries. Doctor's orders. Cherry can have my soup, Sai stated firmly. Anything is better than hospital food. There was some sort of firm commitment in those 2 sentences that actually touched Sakura's heartstrings. It was as if Sai really cared that nobody else had to ever suffer from hospital food as long as he could avoid it. Maybe he had been sick for a long time, and that was the reason? I understand you, Naruto shuddered. Do you think they purposefully make it horrendous, so sick people heal faster and leave for better food? Hospital kitchens use low amounts of salts and spices, because they cater to a wide variety of clinical cases that might or might not die depending on the amount used, Yojeo stated. It is bland, I admit, but far better than roasted newts, and at least it isn't poisoned. Sakura coughed slightly. Her right hand grabbing the water cup near her bed and taking a sip from it quickly. She breathed out afterwards, gently letting the vegetable soup on the bed desk before grabbing her chalkboard and writing. Sai, how can you eat something like that? It's scathing my tongue. The warmth makes you feel fresher afterwards, the pale-skinned boy remarked calmly. He couldn't, after all, claim it was just a foolish child's idea that eating a boiling hot soup could remove a seal designed to keep him in check placed on his tongue. Furthermore, it wasn't as if he hadn't acquired a particular taste for that type of food. Maybe his seal would really fall off if he ate enough spicy. Sai, ever thought of turning your food into a weapon? Naruto asked, clenching his nose shut after giving a hesitant sniff to the soup. I mean, what is in there? Spices. Yeah, I got that from the stinging in my eyes, but what's in there precisely? Peppers. And more peppers. So it's a pepper soup. Mustard is in there too, Sai quipped. And ginger, cinnamon, paprika, and coriander. Let me guess, the green bits, They're pepper too. Chili pepper, Sai nodded. And there's also fennel and garlic. And this is what you usually order at Hebai. Naruto's face was morphed in disbelief. How did you manage to convince the cook? I handed over the recipe the day before, Sai remarked. They placed it in the menu afterwards. Wait, the death soup? That's what you usually eat? Naruto's voice rose of just an octave, before he clamped a hand against his mouth. Really? He hissed out. You know, Sai, I didn't think you were suicidal. Dickless, you should taste it before complaining, Sai replied. No thanks, I like my tongue where it is, Naruto said as he shook his head gently. There was silence in the room for a few moments, as finally the fact that they had passed the second part of the exam seeped in its entirety. We passed, Naruto whispered silently, clutching his chopsticks. We did it. The tic-tac of the chalk on the board from Sakura announced that the girl was writing something too. Yes, and I got Niji, I'll have to wait next time to get promoted with him as my enemy. That's not true, Sakura. You just need a good strategy. We have a month of time, we'll come up with something. So does the enemy, Yojao remarked. That is why it would be pointless to get your hopes up, the Jounin sighed. The Hyuga branch family has access to many techniques of the gentle fist. Sure, you can be guaranteed not to be pelted by kunai or explosive tags, or risk being charred by katonjutsu, but it doesn't mean you'll be able to win. Sensei. Naruto, listen, she snapped back curtly. Hyuga Niji is considered not only a prodigy within his own clan, but also the best among his peers. Sakura has no chance on an arena ground, on a 1-against-1, to win. It is simply the way of things. Was this a battlefield, was this a no-laws arrangement, then she would have had a chance and I would have trained her for it myself. As things are, she does not stand a chance. But. Naruto stammered out, his right flailing quickly. We reached the exams together. We aren't going to stop and. She just has to put up a good fight, Yojao replied calmly. Sure, winning against the Hyuga prodigy would guarantee her promotion to Chunin, but also showing off her skills would do the same even if she were to lose. She narrowed her eyes. The one I'm actually worried about is Sai's match, she looked over to the raven-haired boy. Rock Lee was promoted without usage of chakra, he has been personally trained following Meitogai's regime, and the man is a monster. If there's a tough opponent, then it will be him. She shook her head slightly. Nothing you can't beat with the correct tactic, however, he is a pure taijutsu user after all. No worrying over me? Naruto asked, mocking a pout. Yojao rolled her eyes. I ask you do not kill your opponent, Naruto, she sighed. I heard what happened from Sai already. I thought better of you, to leave your teammates' health in the hands of a foreign ninja, all because of revenge? I suppose now is as good of a time as ever to say it. She looked from Sakura to Sai, before settling on Naruto with cold eyes. Naruto, you disappointed me terribly during your exam. Naruto's eyes widened briefly as the words sunk in. You blinded yourself with rage, and forgot that had the ninja wanted to, she could have easily killed both Sai and Sakura before disappearing in the forest until the end of the exam. Allied village or not, what you did was. She exhaled and calmly set her face to stone, stupid. Irresponsible. Completely out of character. Had you been in Umbu I would have you expelled and stripped back down to Genin, but since you are a Genin I suppose you will have to suffer through my tongue lashing. What the hell were you thinking? You are supposed to be the one to provide first aid to your wounded teammates always. Even with allied village shinobi nearby, you must be the first aid provider. He took a step back as the ex-Umbu kept on speaking hotly against him. Not only that, but you left them alone wounded and unconscious in the hands of a perfect stranger. What if she had been a kunoichi from IWA, who had simply stolen a forehead protector? What if she had been under a henge to appear as someone else? You had no means of knowing her real intentions, no means of discerning her true motifs, and yet you outright went and left your two teammates in her hands. Naruto Uzumaki, what the hell were you thinking? He flinched and lowered his gaze, clenching his fists. I. He choked on the words that wanted to come out from his throat too. He wasn't going to be of any use anyway. Better to leave them with Karen and go after the enemy team. Karen was family, she was an Uzumaki and there was no way she'd. And there is a reason I am telling you this, Yojeo spoke finally as she turned her eyes to stare at all three of them. After you were examined, I was told by the attending physician of the presence of a long-action poison in your bloodstream. It had seeped in through the open wounds, and there is a high chance that either the weaponry used was coated with it, or the one attending to you poisoned you hoping you would die within the end of the week. Naruto's world crashed down. He could hear it break. He could hear the chinks and the cracks spread as he tried to merge the image of Karen as an Uzumaki, as family, with that of a cold-hearted monster that had poisoned his team. But why? He croaked out, feeling pain as those two words took all of his willpower to pronounce. Who knows, Yojeo hissed back as she watched Sakura furiously write on her chalkboard. I knew the bitch wasn't to be trusted. I knew it. See? I told you so. She actually wrote 3 exclamation marks, followed by tapping furiously with the chalk against the board before giving a look of smug satisfaction. In any event, the Umbu remarked, I hope this serves as a lesson, Naruto, her voice lowered calmly. Because of your so well-placed trust, the poison had the chance to work for 2 full days. Sai will need rehab to lift more than his backpack beyond his shoulders, and Sakura's voice? It might just as well be gone. Sakura's eyes widened as her hands clasped to her throat. No, she had spoken before, it wasn't gone. The effect on Naruto, however, was far more profound. His eyes looked hollow as his own right hand had gone to his throat as the boy was grimacing. I didn't know, I hope you have understood the lesson, Naruto, Yojeo replied frostily, before her tone suddenly changed back to the same worried sensei she had used before that. In any event you will receive training specifically against your first encounters, all 3 of you, as I found someone willing to help me out with it. Sai will need to play on Genjutsu to win against Rock Lee and I know just the Jounin for it. Sakura will receive some pointers from a friend of mine and as for you, Naruto. Here she sighed. I have a shinobi who literally begged to be granted permission to train you. So you'll report to Training Ground 7 tomorrow, since he was apparently certain you would emerge unscathed. Then she blinked and began to eat calmly, as if nothing else had happened. Well? Why are you not eating? She asked once more, completely emotionless. It will get cold. It was then that it settled on them that there was something wrong with their sensei. She had delivered an important piece of information about an ally of Konoha, a Kusagaku or Kunoichi trying to poison 2 of the genin assigned to her, and then she had gone back to normal. There hadn't been any incensed anger except for the verbally tearing down of Naruto's folly, and even then she had quickly acted as if it was in the far distant past a moment later. I may never have my voice back, sensei? The quietly written words on the chalkboard were read by Yojeo and Naruto, who was on the same side as the Jounin. You'll probably be unable to scream again. The poison was viciously attacking your vocal cords by the time the tower medic gave you the routine anti-venoms. If you had been sent to the hospital a day later, you would have probably lost your voice entirely, if not your life. She then proceeded to shrug. It's not uncommon for shinobi to return home from missions and then drop dead 5 minutes later. It's an intimidation act that works most of the time. But there's no proof it actually was Karen, Naruto muttered then. It could have been the traps. Sure, Yojeo nodded. I am not berating you for not having attacked the Kunoichi. I am berating you for having implicitly trusted her. The action could have been done by the Konoha team who set the traps, not knowing it would be another allied team who went in their pursuit. Everything is possible, but I highly doubt someone would smear with poison their kunao or traps with such a long-action poison. It would be completely meaningless. If they knew, they would still be checked by their Jounin sensei afterwards. So, it either was Team 10, or Karen. Naruto asked then to be sure. Or someone you didn't see. Someone might have found a bush of berries and poisoned them before leaving, hoping another team would stumble upon them and end up poisoned. There is no certainty unless seen and proven, Naruto. That is why Konoha stresses on the teammates and the bonds. You must have someone to trust implicitly, otherwise you end up breaking before long in our line of business. It is not paranoia, if the entire world is out to get you, Sai stated sagely. Dickless, don't think too much. Your brain can't handle more thoughts than kissing after all. Sigh. Naruto exclaimed back. Stop it you pervert. Pervert. Yes. A light suddenly shone through Naruto's eyes, as Sakura's too seemed to light in amusement. At the same moment as the genin spoke, the kunoichi wrote. Sai's nickname is Pervert from now on. We'll call you Pervert then. It's decided. Naruto clenched his right fist triumphantly. We spent months not knowing what nickname to give back. Now it's done. I'm Dickless, she's Cherry and you're Pervert. With all your talk on dicks I'm surprised it took me more to realize it. There. You. Are. Pervert. Sai's eyes widened as Naruto finished talking. He had a nickname. His shock must have been apparent, because both Sakura and Naruto looked back at him with perplexity. He quickly schooled his features a moment later. Danzo-sama would be mad if he dared to show any emotions on his face. Then again, wasn't he a failure of the root program? And if he was a failure, wasn't he entitled to make mistakes? Pervert. He commented back to the blonde. Still better than Dickless, and Sakura is Kinky Cherry, no use hiding her own perversions. There was a small smile on Sai's face there and then, something which wasn't missed by his teammates, who just grinned back. Yojao felt her throat constrict slightly. She palmed a hand to her face and exhaled slowly. Of all the rotten luck in the world, she had the one to be saddled with a team of perverts. If any of her sons or daughters, because she fully intended to give Hayate a full family, ever tried to nickname each other like that, she'd probably start evasion practice on them with blunt weapons. As it was, 2 of them were recuperating in the hospital's beds and couldn't be subjected to the routine, and the third one had been tongue-lashed by her enough for the day. She sighed and reclined her back against the chair, her gaze wandering to outside the window. It was such a beautiful day. In a room further down the same hallway, Hayashi Hayaga clenched both of his hands as he watched his daughter fight for her life in the intensive care unit. The doctors were working on her constantly, the best that money, fame, influence, and power could buy, and yet there was little hope for more than stabilizing her. His gaze landed firmly on the 2 teammates that had refused to leave. One was an Abarame, while the other was the undercover Umbu, whom he probably had to thank for saving his daughter's life. He had been given a quick report from one of the branch members assigned to the hospital. The Byakugan was a far cleaner way to check for fractures after all, and many members of the second half of the clan worked as medics or nurses, and the news had been grave indeed, but still better than what he had expected. He walked briskly in front of the 2, their eyes widening as they watched him stand in front of them, and widening even further when he made a firm bow towards them. In the name of the Hayaga clan, I thank you for saving my daughter's life. He stood back up after a good minute had passed, letting the shock of the action sink in, as the one who recovered first was the Abarame Genin. Hinata is a prized member of our team. It was our honor. There's no need, Hayaga-sama, we did what anyone else would have done, Kiba hastily added. In any case, Hayashi said. You did the Hayaga clan a great service. And an even greater one to him too. Hinata was never meant to be a kunoichi. Sure, tradition imposed that to become the heir of the clan, but now there would be no hard feelings. The arrow that had struck had literally torn through her sides, piercing her lung and damaging her spine. She would no longer be able to walk. She would no longer be able to fight. She would leave the shinobi forces because of the life-threatening injury and remain home, where he'd find her a suitable match, and with that there wouldn't even be a need to place a cage bird seal on her forehead. Where would a cripple go after all? And if they couldn't protect her from the safety of the main house, then clearly there was something wrong with their guards. As Hayashi thought of this, a small burst of Morse code made its way through a small and portable antenna towards a relay tower hidden deep within the trunk of a tree. From there, the message bounced off 2 more hidden relays, before finally hitting a main deciphering station deep in the bowels of Land of Lighting first line of defense, the Hakusabi Mountain. The message was deciphered and then recoded, before being sent once more to another station which applied the same procedure. Eventually, the small strip of paper that was the message reached the desk of the Raikage. 5 simple words were written on it, 5 words that had been part of a plan years old, since the first time peace had been declared between Kumo and Konoha. A bird is caged free. Crumpled the paper, which burst to flames through the output of electricity. Calmly, The man stood up and crossed his arms behind his back as he straightened up, before turning to watch the surface of his desk piled with paperwork. "Mabby," he said then, after having pressed the button on his desk that was meant to communicate with his assistant. "Send a message to the Hokage. Kyumigakuer will gladly send a representative and a bodyguard to watch the tournament this year. They will arrive within the end of the week, so strongly word to the Hokage that he is to expect them." "Raikage-sama?" "Of course, it will be done." Sighing, I crossed both arms in front of his chest this time. He wouldn't be going. There were no shinobi or kunoichi of Kyumo who had participated in the exams, and he had no intention of suffering through diplomatic talks with the Hokage. A shinobi shouldn't bow and drink half-poisoned tea with another. They should fight and die against one another, never yielding, never stopping. He glimpsed at the papers on his desk. To think he could incinerate a mountain if he wished, and yet he was forced down by the paperwork. Maybe he'd take one page out of Killer Bee's book and go on a vacation somewhere else. The mountains to the north had a particularly nice weather this time of the year around. "Raikage-sama? Who should I notify for the honor of going to Konoha?" A show of force would do good, really good, but he wasn't going to move his brother from his position. The Jinhiriki were weapons both of mass destruction and also of mass defense. The Hakusabi's power could easily topple mountains, and also shield the village with barriers of lightning with ease. Yujito Nii will do as the ambassador. She's cool-headed enough not to claw the face off the Sandaime. As a bodyguard, I will need constant updates on the situation. "Mabby." "Raikage-sama," Mabby replied smoothly. "The last time I left, you disappeared for 3 months. It was just the spur of the moment, an act of rebellion in my youth," he replied with a slight sweat drop on his forehead. "It won't happen again." "I understand, Raikage-sama. I will warn Nii-sama and prepare myself." I sighed in relief. Now, he just had to plan his own way to the northern mountains. Orochimaru meanwhile smiled as he whistled a jingle, his golden eyes settling on the troops readying themselves to march. He grimaced at the sight of a small girl of barely 10, standing in line like the others and readying herself as if she were a kunoichi. "Who let children in to begin with?" "You," he pointed towards her and she suddenly froze and stood to attention. "Your name?" "Orochimaru-sama. I don't have one." So it was one of the desperation orphans born out of wedlock or a whore and left in the middle of nowhere to fend off for themselves. 9 times out of 10 they died before their first year. Those who survived were usually jaded, but she didn't have the stern look or the antagonizing gaze that usually characterized those who survived the world. No, she had to have become an orphan recently. She probably believed fighting against the enemy would bring her parents back, or at least die in revenge. She was a menace for the cohesion of any unit, and frankly, his army didn't need mascots. "Then you're Hebai from now on. Follow me, I need an assistant." He turned and walked to leave, turning just enough to watch her quickly scamper to obey him even with her short legs. He smiled to himself. It felt like having another Anko. He could get used to it if she also did a smiling face every time he presented her with something. Kakashi Hatake stood silently watching the cenotaph of the shinobi killed in mission. Their names, their age, their date of death had been neatly scrawled on all of them. All those who had died defending their village, all those who had become heroes were written there. There was a single gash where a name was supposed to be. That was where originally his father's name had been, before he had chosen to save his team and come back rather than pursue a suicidal mission. It had jump-started a war, his decision. Hundreds had died just so he could save his team. A team that had then proceeded to get killed in a following mission, after his father had committed suicide. He had grown up trying to remove that stain from his family's name since birth. He had trained, he had fought in a war his father had caused and lost friends, cherished bonds, and his other father figure all the while trying to survive through it all. And then he had even been taken away the chance to train his sensei's son. There was a limit. So what if he had all but begged Gyojeo? So what if he had let his mask down and had literally dyed his own hair black? So what if he had worn a greasy-looking black eye patch and swung his forehead protector over his shoulder? He looked completely different, he felt completely different. He gently turned as he heard the soft footsteps of his charge make way towards him, and he couldn't help but smile. It was like looking at a smaller version of Minato-sensei, with whiskers and, hadn't he dyed his hair black? Why was it blonde once more? Had he dyed it back in less than a day? Navy blue? He asked calmly, eyeing the dark blue-colored jumpsuit the boy was wearing. It reminded him so much of his sensei it wasn't even funny. Lost as he was reminiscing, he didn't realize that Naruto was eyeing him carefully like a predator would a prey. "Ah, I like the color," he stammered out back. "If he makes a mistake, I'll have an opening to ask about my father. And if he doesn't, you dyed your hair back to normal to appear once more inconspicuous with the population," the Kyuubi remarked calmly. "You know, Naruto," Kurama said with a slightly hesitant tone. Maybe I was mistaken about you earlier," he said then dutifully. "If you ever need my help, do not hesitate to ask." Naruto's eyes widened for a brief second, just as Kakashi Hatake presented himself. "I am Kakashi Hatake," he began gruffly. "Because of reasons I can't explain, I have a debt to repay with someone I can't tell you of." As a lie, it was pretty smooth, wasn't it? "Thus I will train you in preparation of the exams, understood?" "Yes, sensei," Naruto remarked with a small smile and a quick bowing gesture. "I am Naruto Uzumaki. I am in your care." Polite was always underestimated, after all. Yagura flinched. The Sanbai refused to cooperate any longer. It screamed and trashed deeply within his seal, cracking and splintering apart all that held him back as corals seemed to grow out of his very own body as an answer to that. That by itself was something unprecedented. Isabia was never angry. He was actually always asleep or shyly muttering in a corner, but never, ever, had he been angry. As it was, the seal wasn't strong enough to hold him back. With a deafening sound that echoed and sounded much like a simple snapping of a twig, the seal that held the Sanbai back broke. Yagura's Mizukage tower exploded outwardly, as the three-tailed beast emerged from his host and screamed to the sky. His wail reached beyond the clouds, propagating in the air as the tides grew and the waves crashed, before the turtle Baijuya rolled into itself and with unparalleled speed crashed throughout the buildings that separated it from the sea. With a sickening thud it fell in the water, generating a massive tsunami that swept through the entirety of Kirigakure. That was how the reign of Yagura came to an end. And in the end, it was just as planned, as Toby watched from a nearby tower the scenes of chaos and the shinobi population trying to maintain order. "Toby's such a good boy, isn't he? Remind me again." "Why?" Zetsu spoke firmly with his twin voice as he slowly appeared from behind the masked man. "Silly Zetsu," Toby flapped his arms wide in the sky, as if encircling the moon. "Everything's more beautiful when it's broken." Broken. Snapped. Pierced. All is wonderful in blood and death. Screams are so nice to hear at night. A lullaby of perfection. He giggled then. "But Toby's a bad boy," he whispered seriously. "He forgot." Zetsu exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "What?" "I can't remember." Toby huffed and pouted visibly like a child. "But when I do, I will no longer be forgetting about it." And to that sound piece of logic, Zetsu just disappeared back into the rooftop. The lone cherry non-eye that shined through the mask of Toby reflected onto the village's destruction, as he memorized every single detail, every single pained face, every screaming woman or drowning child's body that he could find. And then he laughed. He laughed as he disappeared into thin air with the power of his eye. Perfection would be the road to take. Because he'd burn down every other way to peace. Chapter 27, The Prologue to an Announced Tragedy. Sasuke Uchiha had a choice to make. As he walked through the half-empty corridors of Secret Place where he would be training for more than a month without seeing the light of the day, he wondered if the choice was actually real or not. Something to make him as strong as Itachi. Something that was dangerous however. Had Itachi something similar then? What if he had, and he defeated Sasuke so easily because he possessed that something? He needed to have it too, if only to even the odds. But what if he died? If he died then he would leave the fate of the Uchiha clan to Itachi himself, and he would not let that happen. He considered his options, calmly and carefully. He felt sour by just thinking at what they were. He didn't have to choose immediately, though he had far more than a month to decide if Ami was worth anything more than being a simple and convenient meat shield. And there also was the Kyuzagakuer team to consider. He hadn't even asked their names, or that of their kunoichi. He didn't want to admit he was starting to notice some things in females, but he did feel mildly uncomfortable whenever the kunoichi looked his way. There just was something in her eyes, those dark eyes. Or maybe it the conical straw hat and the tag with the word Aku written and attached to it. Still, she held herself up proudly and tall, not like her two teammates who seemed squabbling children like Kiba and Ami. Maybe he could ask her if she ever felt the need to just change team and go elsewhere, maybe. Sakura Haruno was not having a good day. Sure, she had been acquitted from the hospital and had been sent home, but their things had taken a thing for the worse. She didn't know why her parents insisted that going to her room and staying there was an effective punishment any longer. She was able to unlock the window with merely the use of a hairpin, and she could now jump out and climb walls. As she jumped from rooftop to rooftop, trying to reach the training ground where her team would train in the morning from that day until the arena exams, she couldn't help but clench her fists tightly. She wasn't a frail Yamato Nadeshiko who would snap when hurt. She was a kunoichi. So what if her throat now sported a scar? It was thin and the stitches applied were far rougher than the wound itself. She could just apply some makeup to make it go away. It wasn't the end of the world. She had gone through enough life-threatening situations when they weren't there to watch her, so why was it different now? It wasn't as if not training would change things. She'd still go and give the exam, she'd still face it, and she'd probably fail it to boot. The training ground was already occupied with both Naruto and Sai by the time she landed. She smiled to them both and waved hesitantly, as her teammates nodded back to her. Well, Sai did. Naruto's eyes were fixed on her throat. There was the hint of pain washing behind his eyes, and the guilt for being probably the cause of it. She shook her head with a bitter smile. She had been the one distracted, not him. It wasn't his fault. Now, if only she could exert her voice and make it known. Do you hear it, Dickless? Sai asked suddenly as the silence between them became suffocating. Huh. Exactly, he remarked with a knowing look. Silence, it's a miracle, isn't it? Sakura's forehead sported a nervous tick mark as she gritted her teeth and furiously clenched her right fist. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to rant or yell. She was, however, going to hit the boy with all her fury. Come off it, pervert, Naruto remarked. We all know you like to be berated by Sakura. You're a masochist, aren't you? Sakura gawked at Naruto. Naruto smiled slightly back at Sakura with that now bitter smile of his, before turning to Sai once more. And let's face it, you suck at reading the atmosphere. That does not make sense, Sai stated. You breathe the atmosphere, you don't read it. Never mind, Naruto sighed. Sakura? Are you fine? His cerulean eyes turned to look at her with worry, and as they did she couldn't help but realize a tiny thing she had missed. He had blonde hair now. She knew that he had dyed it black, but to see it again in its natural color. Naruto, why is your hair blonde again? She tried to say it, but what came out was merely a strangled hiss. She coughed slightly, before breathing deeply and then gesturing to her own hair, and then to his. He understood the message, because his eyes lit up. If I make myself visible with blonde hair during the exams, he replied calmly, then when I dye it black I will appear far more inconspicuous. Sakura exhaled. She made an awkward smile and then nodded. It wasn't that she particularly disliked him with dark hair after all. It sort of reminded her of Sasuke's. No. She shook her head strongly and then calmly took a step forward towards the now blonde boy. She gestured at him and then at her. She had to make it clear. The actions she had done in the forest had been the spur of the moment, nothing more. There was nothing else to say about it. Sure, Naruto was a good teammate, maybe the best one could hope for since he was virtually indestructible, but romance was not on the table. She could fantasize about it, but as it was she couldn't love him without ending up separated from him because of the rules. Maybe after Chiryunin, which meant at least after another year for her, it would be a different story, but until then, she had to make it clear. Sakura. He was perplexed. He probably didn't understand what she was saying. She pointed at him. Me. She pointed at herself. You. Then she made a firm cross with both arms. No. She nodded. He frowned for a second, then he understood in his tense posture she hadn't even realized he had been tense, relaxed slightly. He sighed in what seemed like relief, before his eyes looked at her with a set melancholy. Of course, he whispered. I'm sorry for what happened, I'll change teams after. She shook her head furiously. No. It's not that. Now there was genuine confusion on Naruto's face as the boy scratched the back of his head sheepishly. What are we talking about? She brought both arms to the sky as she mocked, clutching the air with her eyes turned upwards. Prayer. She crossed her arms. No praying. She sighed, and then felt a blunt tip gently push against her shoulder. She turned her gaze to Sai, who was holding a paintbrush and a scrap of parchment. Cherry, why don't you write it down? That did piss Sakura off. So what if she had forgotten that Sai had ink and parchment always available? It wasn't as if she wasn't nervous herself. She grabbed the brush and the parchment, and slowly wrote. What happened in the forest meant nothing. Now, that could be open to interpretation, couldn't it? She had to make it clear. I didn't kiss you because I like you. That sounded harsh, didn't it? It was just the spur of the moment. There, this should do it. She passed it to Naruto, who read it quickly, before looking at her with a raised eyebrow. I already knew that. All right. It was official. She was going to slam Naruto's head in the ground, then Sai's, then Naruto's again, then maybe she would go and hide in a corner and wait until the end of times for someone to tell her just why her teammate didn't think anything more from a kiss from her. You like Sasuke, right? She stopped her intentions of death and destruction on the spot. Did she like Sasuke? Did she like him any longer? No, Sasuke had no longer been part of the equation of her love life since when? She coughed embarrassedly. What could she answer to that? In the end, she simply turned slightly red and shook her head. Oh, all right, Naruto shrugged before turning to gaze at the sky. A few moments later and he felt a small slip of parchment nudge against his cheek. He frowned and looked at the paper that Sakura was holding with trembling hands and seemed conflicted about handing over to him. She held her eyes down and her face was blushing as if she had suddenly discovered the shy and bashful adjectives and wished to use them. He grabbed the parchment and read it in one breath. Why did you stop asking me out for dates? You said no so many times, he replied and looked with interest as the girl had flinched at the beginning of his sentence, before now standing enraptured by his words. In the end I realized that no matter how many times I would ask, you'd never say yes. He shrugged. As simple as that. Sakura bit her lips then, crossing her arms over her chest and looking sideways. He raised an eyebrow at such a display. Whoever understood women was good. It was in that type of strange silence that their sensei found them and coughed to get their attention. Very well, she began. Since there is a high chance at least one of you will fight another teammate, during the morning you will be working on simple exercises. I am not saying you cannot talk about the tactics you wish to employ against your opponents in the exam, but be forewarned you might be working against yourself if you end up fighting your teammates. The trio looked at one another for an instant, before returning their gazes forward to their teacher. Understood, sensei, they chorused, at least, Naruto and Sai did while Sakura merely mouthed the words. And please, she exhaled, stop doing that. Doing what, sensei? They chorused once more. Yes, Yojao sighed. That. Yojao watched them depart and start doing their runs around the training ground without as much as a second glance. Her ears had already caught the shuffling noise of a few leaves brushed aside, and as her gaze went to the white mane of Jiraiya of the Sunin, she could not help but instinctively tense. Was the man spying on her team? Surely, he was not going to pull them away from her teachings, after all she only had them in the morning, and with the afternoons having them busy elsewhere. She felt strangely displeased at the thought that someone could come and steal away what time she had managed to cut out for her team. She actually felt unnerved by it. She kept giving sideways glances to where the legendary Jiraiya hid, expecting him to leap out at any moment and ask her if he could take Naruto away for some training. She was going to put her foot down and say no. Nobody stole her team from beneath her nose. As expected, the shinobi leapt out just as her team had finished 5 laps, forcing them to stop and stare at the strange-looking man who was standing atop a giant toad while holding his body in a strange posture. Listen here and gather around, for it is I. Jiraiya, the legendary Sannin, has come to town. Be honored. Be wooed. Be enthralled by my masculinity and... Jiraiya-sama, Yojao cut in sharply and frostily, I am training my students. Ah, Uzuki-san. Do not worry, I will only need a few minutes of Naruto's time too. A few minutes. She raised her right eyebrow calmly. Maybe take him away for the mornings from now forth. The Hokage's orders were pretty clear on it, and considering his... The strange white-haired shinobi looked around for a moment. Tenant, it's for the best. She bit her lip. Going against the word of Jiraiya was fine, but against that of the Hokage? That was treason. She could not do that. Yojao groaned as she forcefully nodded to the Sannin, who simply smiled widely at that. Naruto just watched the scene unfold with his mouth slightly ajar. It was not the toad per se, but the name. Jiraiya of the Sannin had taught his father, the Yondaime. He had been the teammate of Orochimaru. He was not actually angry at separating from his team also for the morning, albeit it did rather sting because it meant he would not be seeing them at all until the end of the month. He exhaled slowly as he bowed gently to his sensei first and to the legendary shinobi next. I'll be in your care, then, Jiraiya-sama. Sai's face showed no signs of emotions, but Sakura's was conflicted as they watched Naruto leave with the strange shinobi. The pink-haired girl's look turned from the boy's back to her sensei's face, with a look of bitterness that just sent alarms running all over Yojao's head. You'll be meeting your own private teachers this afternoon. They're doing me a favor, so please try and act responsibly with them, all right? Sakura nodded grimly. I'm sure it's going to be amusing, Yojao muttered beneath her breath. The girl was practically mute, and her teacher, Anko, was going to have a field day. No, to be more precise, she was having a field day. She was going to teach some upstart bratty kunoichi how to fight and act tough, and then maybe they would get drunk together. She knew just the place where to get something stiff and warm, in both senses of the terms. As she jumped down with her leather jacket and all, in front of the appointed location, she grinned like a cat. There the pink-haired girl was. It was a pity she could not teach her some techniques of the torture and interrogation department without having to kill her, because the girl had potential to be an exciting torturer. She would have to wait at least until Chiryunin. Anko had not lied when she had told the girl she was interested in getting her as an apprentice. She rarely lied. Hey there, little Itzy Genin. She cheerfully smiled and waved her hand at the girl, who spun around half scared and with her eyes wide. Anko's eyes already trailed to her scar near her throat. Oh. You survived the Chiryunin exams with a nasty scar to remember them by, huh? Well, I think we can find a way to make it look nice and intimidating to your opponent by the time we're done. She stalked closer, like a panther on the prowl. Well then, how about you tell me something about you? She slowly lowered her head to the girl's ears. Like your favorite color, your name, the type of guy you prefer, or maybe you like girls. She jiggled her breasts to point out. Ah, how cute, she smirked. You're blushing. Sakura was actually steaming red. She consciously sent a wide-eyed look at her sensei qualities before looking down at hers, and that it enraged her. She would have wanted to say something about it, but she could not yet at least, and it did not make her happy in the least. Can't talk? Cat got your tongue. Anko smirked as she slowly tapped the girl's forehead. My, this is going to be so much fun. You will be, I do not know, my mute sidekick, or henchman. Henchwoman should actually be more appropriate, but since you are lacking in that, henchkid. Or henchbrat. She clapped her hands together. That's it. From now on, you're henchbrat. Sakura growled slightly. Her throat pained her from simply doing that, forcing her to cough and shake her head. What? Already refusing my authority? Anko's voice dripped with frost, the complete change of humor freezing Sakura on the spot. That won't do. It won't do at all. She grabbed the girl by the wrist and with practiced ease threw her on the ground. Sakura's breath departed from her as Anko's punch connected with her guts, making her open her mouth wide as all the air she had exited through her throat. The next punch hit her squarely in the right cheek, making her snap her neck to the side as she felt blood gushing to her tongue from only Kami knew where. Anko's weight landed on her, the woman's body pinning her easily on the ground as the purple-haired Takubetsu Jounin cracked her knuckles. "You have no idea," Anko said with a feral smirk. "Oh, you have no idea how well I'm going to work on you. By the time I am done, yeah, by then you will probably be a completely different girl," the Jounin chuckled darkly. "First off, we start with pain tolerance." And with a singing tone, the next hit slammed against Sakura's left cheek. A kunai soon found itself in Anko's hands, as the purple-haired Jounin smiled. "You know that cutting lines across the cheeks, right where they connect to the nose, it's a nice way to get to know someone." Sakura whimpered, trying to push the Jounin away or to scream at the very least, but nothing came out of her mouth. No, Anko shook her head. "It won't do." The kunai point was now close to Sakura's emerald right eye, which forced the genin to stand frozen and still in her position. "Now, let's start again. My name is Anko Mitarashi. I enjoy dango, holding tea ceremonies and wearing pretty yukata when I go out during festivals. I disliked whimsy and wimpy girls who believe this level of pain is enough to whimper, and traitor of the leaf." Anko's breath tickled Sakura's throat as the Jounin added. "And my dream." Her voice sounded ecstatic as she spoke. "My dream is to drive a thick and pointy sword straight through my sensei's guts and hear him scream as he dies between throbs of pain." Was the woman actually moaning at that? Just who had her sensei handed her off to? "And you are Sakura Harano, yes? Genin, you like some boy I'm sure, maybe the Uchiha, wealthy, broody, scion of an important clan, who wouldn't at your stupid age? I liked a broody person too at your age. He then proceeded to abandon me after I gave him my everything, but does it matter? No, it doesn't. We're talking about you, right? Well, let's see, you started training in the last months, your body is underdeveloped because of hunger and since you aren't an orphan and aren't poor you're a flimsy little bitch who thought that food could be wasted down the drain, right?" The Jounin hissed. "I hate bitches unless they're my bitches, and you are not mine. So I'm hoping you passed that phase, did you?" The kunai tip was now slowly making its way down her neck, as if it was a soft caress, if only it were not cold steel with the potential to pierce through her jaw with ease. "You know, kunai were gardening tools at first," Anko spoke offhandedly. "If you still want to lose weight, we can trim you a bit, maybe a limb, an ear, some hair, an eye also? Yeah, we could take out one of your eyes. You enjoy taking out eyes, don't you? Your teammate lost his, cruel way to go, and he still forgave you." The Jounin made a tisk sound. "Some people never learn." There was silence for a moment. "You know, when you're fighting a female opponent, to humiliate them generally means to win. It hurts more to cut away bits and pieces of their clothes than actually hurting them, strange isn't it? I'd think some kunoichi are in the profession just for the kicks of adrenaline or because they fantasize about being raped by enemy shinobi, but then again what do I know?" There was a light sound of fabric ripped as Sakura's strength to escape increased with the desperation. "See what I mean? I barely scratched your pants and here you are, already thinking gah. What is this mad woman going to do? And you know what? I'm conflicted. I mean, I should be teaching you and I think I'm doing a really good job but, we're missing something," Anko sighed. "Maybe we don't have chemistry." "No, can't be that." There was a moment of silence as Anko's eyes lit up. "Right. We're missing your side." She jumped back a moment later. Sakura stumbled on her feet in a hurry, panting and breathing raggedly as she looked at her shorts. The right leg's side had a small cut, just barely, but it was still there. Her hand shot to her kunai pouch, only to find it gone. Her hands had clasped over nothing. She looked through her secret pockets, her second and third pouches. She began to sweat as she narrowed her eyes on the purple-haired woman who just seemed to be enjoying the moment. "Oh? Lost something?" Anko's smile grew deeper and deeper as she twirled a kunai in her hand. "You know what?" She launched the kunai in the air, in Sakura's direction. Come at me with the intent to kill. Sakura charged ahead to grab the kunao's handle, and maybe you will survive this training. Just as her hand reached for the weapon, a gut-wrenching punch hit her squarely in the stomach, sending her to sprawl on the ground with the kunao in hand. Well. Anko chuckled as she simply stood in her attacking posture. All done. Arg. Sakura coughed, blood splattering out from her mouth as she grasped at the ground. Come on. I'll fight you until blood is all you can taste and feel. Anko's right leg hit squarely against Sakura's stomach once more in a devastating uppercut, before the Jounin's left hand punched straight in the face the girl. Healing chakra can even mend broken teeth, you know? You'll probably need it by the end of the day, Anko giggled to herself. If you have any teeth left, that is. Sakura watched with disbelief through the hazy red fog that seemed to be clouding her vision. The woman moved closer once more. She could still feel the kunao in her hand, however. She could stay down though. She could stop fighting. It would be easy, she just had to lose consciousness and it would be over. There would be no more pain. It would be the end. She felt woozy. Just a quick nap wouldn't hurt anyone, right? No. It would. Her teammates, they trusted her, didn't they? And she was weak. She had been weak for too long. She wasn't going to stand down or stop fighting just because. She ground her teeth, she spat out one that had come loose, and then with murder flaming behind her eyes she snarled at the Jounin and charged ahead. The last thing she remembered through the hazy fog of pain and anger was the sadistic smile on the Jounin's face. Saisata was having tea. The drink was warm, the brew finely scented, and the room they were in was calm and comforting. He wondered what type of training they could have inside a house that didn't finish with the destruction of said room. The woman in front of him had red eyes and dark raven hair that descended in curls. She dressed in a sort of white bandaged outfit, and he recognized her as the teacher of Team 8. Kurane Yui was the genjutsu mistress of Konoha that much he had gleaned from the files Danzo-sama held of the Jounin. So, sigh, Kurane made a warm and comforting smile. Do you know why I accepted to teach you genjutsu? Rock Lee suffers from a chakra deficiency problem, he replied monotonously. He does not possess the necessary chakra to quickly dispel multiple genjutsu techniques or multi-layered genjutsu. Indeed, Kurane nodded. And do you know why we are training in this room? We shouldn't be, Sai answered. One mean to remove a genjutsu is through pain. Another is through disbelieving the illusion with something the brain can catch with its subconscious. My, you did your research, Kurane smiled warmly. Indeed. So the question is, are we really training in my house? And if so, how did you get here? Just as the question reached the boy's ears, Sai's surroundings changed to those of a grassy hill overlooking Konoha. He wasn't having tea, but drinking water. He wasn't sitting on a comfortable-looking sofa but on a blanket. He recalled having actually accepted the invitation to sit down. Genjutsu is the difficult art of using yin chakra manipulation directly into someone's brain and to make them dream, shall we say, of things that can be used for misdirection, for interrogation purposes, or generally just about anything you can think of that might serve your purpose. Kurane chuckled lightly. You see, it is a far subtle art which, when mastered, can grant the shinobi or the kunoichi an unparalleled ace in their sleeves. Sai nodded firmly. Very well then, we will begin with a simple imagination exercise. You draw, is that correct? He nodded again. Then I wish for you to imagine drawing something. Do not actually draw it. Simply imagine what you would like to draw and then firmly push the chakra into the parchment. You shouldn't be able to see anything the first times you try, but eventually you should start to feel the strain from chakra exhaustion. In that moment, yin and yang chakra will actually be unbalanced. When that happens, try to get a feel of the yin chakra, and try to use it to form the illusion. You should successfully self-hypnotize yourself into seeing the drawing on the picture. Sai raised an eyebrow. How did that help against Rock Lee? Yang chakra is used afterwards, to propel the illusion from your brain to the one of your enemy. The faster it is done, sometimes even with the usage of hand signs, the better the genjutsu sticks. To do so seamlessly and repeatedly is the mark of a genjutsu expert. To do so flawlessly even under duress, that's what earned me my jounin rank, she smiled one last time. I expect extreme seriousness from you. The method of training is dangerous. If by mistake you end up draining all of your yang chakra, you could pretty much die. He stiffened slightly. And then his eyes widened briefly. He had never been afraid of death before. He had grown up en route. Emotions weren't meant to be. Being afraid of death wasn't something they taught. Yet now he was afraid of dying, but not for himself, no. He was afraid because his teammates might feel sad about it. They called him pervert, but they cared for him, just as did he care for them? He couldn't go against Danzo-sama's orders but if he had to say it, then yes, he cared for his teammates. And as he nodded and began the training exercise, he was sure to be extra careful about it. Dickless and Kinky Cherry would simply be lost without pervert to keep them in line. Naruto watched as the white-haired Sunin took him over to a water stream, before dropping on the ground a large scroll and settling it against a tree. Well then, brat. Jiraiya visibly smiled as he widened his arms. I am the gallant Jiraiya. You have to know about me, don't you? Yes, Jiraiya-sama, he stiffly nodded. Naruto's cerulean eyes carved deeply into the man's own, as he appeared to be waiting for something more. The fact the old shinobi hadn't even moved from his strange position with his arms wide made him perplexed. What was he expecting? Jiraiya coughed. You can start praising my masculinity when you wish, he added. I'm the author of the Ika Ika series after all. The top hit of porn everywhere across the elemental countries. He smiled and brought his thumb up. It is I. Jiraiya. He widened his arms once more, tapping his feet to rhythm as if to point out each of his words. No. Naruto tried once more hesitantly. Did the old shinobi lose his marbles somewhere across the battlefield? Maybe he had just grown senile with time. Good. Jiraiya sighed and brought his shoulders down before muttering. Just my luck, he took after him after all. Jiraiya-sama. Naruto hesitated, but finally asked, why am I here? Oh, right. The Toad Sage clapped his hands together. I want to officially take you on as my apprentice. What do you think about it? I'd vouch for you and all. You could learn quite a load of secret techniques and jutsu in a short amount of time under my tutelage, and you'd also have access to the Toad Summoning Scroll. Toads are the best summon ever to boot. As the man cheerfully smiled and made another thumb-up gesture, Naruto took a step backwards. And that is, why? Because the Hokage asked, of course. Another thumb up. Can you please stop it with the pose? Naruto whispered. It's annoying. Jiraiya's shoulders drooped down. No respect for the elders, the shinobi shook his head. No respect at all? The Sandaime wanted you to teach me? Naruto pried once more. Why? Hell if I know, Jiraiya shrugged, holding on to his smile. Liar, Naruto deadpanned calmly, his eyes narrowing. Silence fell in their surroundings, interrupted only by the rustling of the water along the stream that crossed the small area Jiraiya had chosen as a training ground. You know, don't you? There is a reason. It either has to do with the Kyuubi in my guts, or with something else. Jinhiriki are prized possessions of the village. Have you come to make sure I'm 100% loyal to the Sandaime and the village? Sharp brat, Jiraiya sighed as his face slowly turned serious. Well, yeah, you got me. I'm the seal expert of Konoha after all. Something's wrong with the seal, I should check it. The little spectacle you did in the forest, the disappearance of the Ichibai, Sarutobi-sensei wanted me to check it out. And why didn't you ask straightforwardly? Well, that's just the icing on the cake, really. I've been hearing a lot of things about a prodigy trained by the Yami of Shinobi that. Aoba-sensei wasn't called that, Naruto deadpanned. Jiraiya blinked. You don't know. I don't know what? Naruto asked, blinking back. Danzo. Danzo-sensei. Shimura Danzo, Jiraiya began calmly. Is known as the Yami of Shinobi in the rest of the world. He was the leader of Umbu for years, before moving on to lead a secret shinobi unit known as Root, which takes care of counterintelligence and spy capturing within the village, as well as Black Ops operation outside. He's retired, Naruto weakly, for he actually did not believe his own words, replied. I never asked him what he did before, so what? If he's retired then I'm Tsunade, Jiraiya exhaled. Listen kid, why don't you ask him later tonight? That way you'll know if I'm lying or not. Naruto meekly nodded to those words, which made Jiraiya smile tentatively. Very well, now that this is over, let's get back to the apprenticeship. Will I have to leave my team behind? Ah, that is, yeah, Jiraiya sighed. Apprenticeships, they're for life, you know. Technically, they do it so that when the shinobi master dies the apprentice can take over flawlessly. This doesn't mean you won't take missions with your team though. He hastily added, only, you'll have to follow me around the elemental countries when I go out to learn my job, and when it will be over you'll be tested directly for Jounin rank, so I'd leave my team behind, Naruto whispered. Well, but you'd become stronger, far stronger than before. No, Naruto shook his head. I go with my team or I don't go at all, he finished calmly. Jiraiya exhaled slowly. You sure? I mean, there are a lot of techniques I could teach you, like the Raise-Non or the summoning techniques. I'm sure, he replied. If you're so sure. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head. Well, can't do much more than this then. I'll just check your seal and then we can, you know, peek on girls. His thumb pointed behind him, to where the thick canopy of undergrowth seemed to part way to reveal a small hole that gleamed into a natural pool of water. Said natural pool of water held within kunoichi and civilian girls bathing, skimpily clad, if he could add that. A slight dribble of blood came down from Naruto's nose, before he slowly shook his head and began to walk back out of the hole he had subconsciously occupied. He silently slapped both of his cheeks before narrowing his gaze on Jiraiya, who was holding the same grin the Cheshire Cat held. So? Enjoyed the view? You could try apprenticing Sai, Naruto remarked smoothly. He's a pervert just like you. Really? Jiraiya's face turned thoughtful. Because I'm not just any pervert, I'm a super pervert. Yes, definitively, Naruto nodded firmly. You seem made for one another. The sun inside, still, I'm glad the rumors were just that, rumors. You know, the Sandaime told me you were some sort of introverted brat who spoke little and stuck to the shadows. I even understood why Danzo might have caught an interest in you with that, but you're pretty easy to talk to. Naruto's eyes widened as he slowly came to the realization that the man was right. When had he started talking, rather than just being there? A small smile spread across his face. You're right, he answered. I think, all I needed was simply, you know, someone who cared. He closed his eyes for a moment. You know, Jiraiya-sama. He crossed his arms over his chest. Let's say, hypothetically, I was to accept, what would happen to my teammates? That would depend, Jiraiya remarked. Usually they are placed together with another shinobi and sent on missions, but if they both do pass and reach Chiryunin rank, they might as well be directly introduced into a 4-man Chiryunin team and sent on routine patrols across Konoha's borders. I shouldn't be thinking of this concerning me, Naruto muttered. But what would be best for my teammates? Naruto, Jiraiya spoke seriously. Nothing prohibits you from taking the Jounin exam together with them if you so wish. And consider that if you really do not want to travel with me, I can just sign off a waiver saying you have an extremely important secret rank mission to do while going undercover as a Chiryunin. You'd go that far? Naruto asked in disbelief. You know, Jiraiya remarked. I'm old and cranky, and my student decided to die acting like the hero he was, so I've got no one else to inherit my techniques. If I have to choose, before the Konoha library decides for me and gives them off to some no-name guy? Then yeah, I'd rather you have them. Naruto chuckled mirthlessly. That's nice, but why me? Ahem, Jiraiya coughed. That is. Your student was the 4th Hokage, wasn't he? A slow chill crept down Jiraiya's spine. And I know my mother is Kushina Uzumaki. The chill became frosty the next instant. And she was under Orochimaru's team. The chill began to howl as the frozen winds of the tundra. So you both met a lot, didn't you? Where are you? So, Jiraiya-sama, I have to ask, Naruto's voice was slow. The fact that Kakashi Katake is in truth Kakashi Hatake, and he is the Yondame's student, and you are the Yondame's sensei. The chill slammed into Jiraiya's heart. That makes me the Yondame's son, doesn't it? And he saw it there. He saw the cold and icy chill of a child discovering just what his father had done to them, and just as he looked for the signs of blistering anger or some sort of petty sadness, he found nothing. He blinked twice. Either the boy was apt at hiding his emotions, or he wasn't actually angered by the revelation. Drat, Jiraiya whispered. Sensei is going to kill me. Then he brought his right hand to his chin. Just to ask, how do you know of Hakashi's real identity? He can't hide his smell, Naruto tapped to his nose. I met him before, and his posture, it just reminded me of him. The reason he disguised himself was probably because he's the proctor for the third part of the exam, but then why go to great lengths like those to train me? Unless he has something to prove, like to my father. I admit it's true, Jiraiya murmured. You're smarter than other boys your age. I'll take it as a compliment. Embarrassing silence settled between the two for a moment more, before Jiraiya finally sighed out loudly and muttered. Fine. I've got an idea. Let's do this. You know, the Yondame had a technique called Raise Non. And? Well, I can't teach you the Raise Non, because it's a technique. You know, a really dangerous and life-threatening technique that can easily kill another shinobi. Jiraiya's eyes gleamed slightly. But it's also really simple to execute it. And someone could stumble upon it by chance. It's nothing difficult if you have the chakra for it, after all. Naruto's eyebrows rose. Jiraiya-sama, you aren't suggesting. Call me sensei, brat, Jiraiya sighed. If I'm going to get flack from the old geezer, well, better to get a good load of it for something big rather than something trivial. Thank you, sensei, Naruto stammered out as he stood ramrod straight. We'll check your seal later, the Toad Sage said. For the moment, try and bring forth chakra to your right hand. So it was that Naruto and Jiraiya began to train, just as elsewhere Sakura Haruno and Anko Mitarashi did, or like Saisato and Kurane Ui. And as the three genin trained, preparing for their Chunin exams. Orochimaru snarled slightly and backhanded the orphan girl straight on the cheek, sending her to tumble on the ground with a small cry. Hebai. I told you 500. Not 505 or 495. 500. Was it that difficult? Orochimaru-sama No, he shook his head. When I ask for 500 paper cranes, he remarked calmly, I expect 500 paper cranes. With a single hand gesture, he burned the pile of paper. You have until tomorrow to bring me 500 paper cranes, the snake Sunin softly said then, grabbing Hebai by the throat. If you fail, his golden eyes settled on her scared amber ones. I will have your limbs and use you as a ball. Then he dropped the dark-haired girl back on the ground, where she scampered to leave his tent. Really, he snorted, good aid is so difficult to find. He bit his thumb and drew the blood, enough to summon a small snake. Tell Manda to get ready, he hissed. We're attacking in 3 weeks. The snake bowed before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Orochimaru just smiled. Everything was going according to plan, or plans, depending on which one of the many he was thinking of. It was difficult to think about all of them to be sure, but they were all interesting, and he liked interesting things foremost. Chapter 28, the first chapter in A Tale of Woe. Kaisashi Haruno had been a baker all his life. His wife had been a baker all her life and she, differently from him, came from a long and upstanding line of bakers who served bread since the times the first Hokage founded the village. Therefore, when their daughter had decided to become a shinobi, they had not put their foot down. In no way could she have the ability to mold chakra, since not one person in the family ever possessed it. Of course, fate decided differently, and since molding chakra automatically enrolled you in the academy, there simply was not a choice. Kaisashi had thus watched his little girl grow up speaking about the Uchiha air, about throwing kunao and tactics. He had watched her eyes lit up countless times whenever she mentioned taijutsu, genjutsu, or ninjutsu. He had heard her rant about her team not having Sasuke-kun and then heard her plead to them not to treat Naruto as if he were a monster or some sort of beast, because he wasn't. He had watched Sakura grow from a young girl into a budding woman, and he truly held a large amount of pride in the fact that his daughter was indeed becoming a fine kunoichi. He knew it was useless to just lock her up in her room, he hadn't even tried to, but his wife was simply scared. Sakura was their only child after all, and Mabuki had always been the worrywart. Kaizashi, one of his shinobi customers, grimaced as he called for him. Listen, he added. I think you should have a talk with your daughter soon, before she ends up bad. The jounin who talked had spiky light blue hair and blue eyes. He wore the standard outfit of the Konohagaku shinobi, complete with a flak jacket and a forehead protector on a long band that tapered off. He also wore his sleeves rolled up, and was holding onto a bag of bread he had recently bought. Saburo-san. Saburo just grimaced again, before shaking his head. Don't tell anyone I told you, but I saw your daughter training with Anko. Of all people, Mitarashi isn't supposed to be teaching anyone, much less a genin. You'd be better off killing the girl yourself rather than let her suffer through that woman's training. Kaizashi frowned. I don't think I know of this, Mitarashi. She was Orochimaru's apprentice. Saburo shook his head with a heavy sigh. I think the traitor turned some screws loose with her head. She was never the same when she came back. I'll talk with my daughter tonight, Kaizashi acquiesced. It might be too late by then, Saburo murmured to himself as he left, leaving behind a puzzled Kaizashi. Sakura Harino opened her eyes to the ceiling of the hospital, and more precisely to the stern gaze of a nurse who was treating her wounds with the utmost care. She got you too, huh? The nurse muttered. Listen, if you're quick and smart enough you'll manage to hide for a week or two, generally that's all it takes for her to lose interest in you. Sakura groaned as she felt her throat literally on fire. Did her tongue taste like alcohol? Had she drunk? How had she drunk? She remembered passing out. Didn't she pass out? Don't try and talk. She probably got drunk and then force-fed you something too, the nurse snorted. Probably sake, poor child, what was your sensei thinking? Ah. She moaned as she felt a bone snap back into place. She was actually glad she felt lightheaded. It eased the pain she was feeling. Really, what does she think human bodies are made of? This will take at least 3 days to heal. She nudged her left arm, apparently broken and in a cast before she had even realized it. Yes dearie, your left arm is a no-no, the nurse was old and wrinkled. Anma. Sakura murmured weakly. She had wanted to say grandma, because she was seeing her grandmother floating behind the nurse, saying something like, don't come over here, Sakura, but really, that was impossible because ghosts didn't exist. This had to be a hallucination due to alcohol. Everything was going to be fine when she woke up again. Yeah, she felt so sleepy. Sakura's eyes fluttered open to the night sky, that and the noise of a feral beast. This had to be a dream. She was wearing her hospital gown and her left arm was still in a cast. There was no way she had been moved to the depths of a forest, the training ground 44. There was no way they would. There was a kunao on the ground, with a note pierced straight by its tip. She hesitated for a moment, before using her right hand to grab it and read the note beneath the moonlight. My sensei used this same training with me. Survive until you reach the exit. Oh, of course I asked a friend of mine to take away most of your chakra. So no running above the trees and escaping the feral and highly dangerous beasts that lurk around. See ya soon. From the adorably sexy Anko-sensei. Sakura blanched. The silent steps of one of the training grounds tigers moved closer to its prey, as the pink-haired kunoichi just swallowed nervously. She held tightly onto the kunao with her right hand. It was her only weapon. She had nothing else. The nights were getting colder now, September was moving towards October end, and she was in the middle of the forest of death. Moreover, this time around, her teammates were not there. Naruto's eyes shone with determination as his right hand brought out a torrential amount of chakra, forming some sort of microcyclone that revolved around his palm. It should be a sphere, Jiraiya remarked. Can't you bring it down? Revolving movements, Naruto, revolving movements. Working on it, Naruto hissed out. As it was, he had a tornado in his palm that always ended up exploding before he could compress it. Jiraiya-sensei helped him a lot, giving him pointers and showing him the technique again and again, but really, he couldn't actually feel what someone else was doing, and as such there was no way to actually manage a clockwise and counterclockwise movement of chakra without practicing. Why are you trying to create a Biju from your hands? The Kyuubi snorted through his ear. You can create chakra rays from the tip of your fingers, if you really wish for it, but the Biju is generated from your mouth. He had no idea what the fox was talking about, until he found himself watching as tiny streaks of red chakra flowed through his body towards his throat. Just follow the instructions, the Kyuubi murmured. Relax, let it flow. Suddenly, Naruto's throat seemed to bulge slightly as the teen opened his mouth wide. A loud groan echoed before the boy's body convulsed abruptly forward, spitting out an orb of blue chakra that flew in the air before crashing up against a tree bark, detonating it to smithereens. That's the most worthless Biju I have ever seen, the Kyuubi deadpanned. I would feel ashamed if I were you. Naruto? Jiraiya asked with half-narrowed eyes. What was that? Ahem. He shook his head and scratched the back of his neck. I improvised. Well, Jiraiya blinked. I suppose that could work. The white-haired man shook his head. I doubt anyone else could compare that to a Raise-Non, whatever the hell it was. Biju Naruto said, closing his eyes. Tailed beast bomb. You know, the old toad sage's eyes lit with something Naruto couldn't comprehend. Now that you say that, your father came up with his Raise-Non by copying the Biju of the Jinhiriki of Kyumigakuer during the war. Really? It was just a simple word worded as a question, but the underlying tone of need was something Jiraiya was extremely familiar with, the desire to know more. I know this story, he smirked. I'll tell you while we go find a place to eat for the day, he chuckled. Let them see you with me, that should put up quite a storm of rumors. Thank you, Jiraiya-sensei. Now, if only he could manage to tell the boy he was his godfather, without eliciting some sort of internal feud between them, next time, he'd let Sarutobi-sensei handle it. Yujito Nii was sternly grumbling to herself as she jumped from tree to tree. Her eyes narrowed as she flung one kunao against a snake whose only fault was to be taking the sun on a nearby branch, before taking another jump forward. Horrid creatures, she murmured. What's taking you so long, Mabi? She snarled back behind her, where the Raikage's secretary was sweating profusely. Nii-sama, the woman answered. We've been running for 3 days. So. I am not used to it. You're a jounin of Kyumigakuer, act like one. With another powerful jump, Yujito moved forward. It was nothing, 3 days of running. She had done much worse and much longer when she had been 5, training to control the Nibi. The technique to send reports to the Raikage consumes a lot of chakra, Mabi tried to exclaim at Yujito's back as the Jinhiriki just kept on running ahead. Yujito did not answer the woman. Those were all excuses. You could do something or you could not, and if you could not, then you had better be able to do it the next day or there would be consequences. She shuddered at the thought of the consequences for her failures. She wasn't going to fail. The Raikage had given her a mission, and she was going to follow it through. Another snake, to the left, beneath a bush, the Nibi's voice was met with the swift and brutal execution of the pointed snake, as on more kunao flew from her hand to kill the beast. Well done. She didn't know why the Nibi hated snakes. She knew it had something to do with a great white snake, but anything more left the beast tight-lipped. Not that they spoke much, since on one side her instructors had been pretty clear that any words exchanged between them were usually poisoned with lies, and on the other the two-tailed beast was quiet and silent most of the time. Still, if by killing snakes the Nibi cooperated smoothly, then who was she to say no to it? She didn't like snakes to begin with. There was also another thing she actually had to do to make the Nibi cooperate with her fully, but that one was something she felt too disgusted to think about trying it. Her blonde hair whipped behind her in the wind as she jumped a bit higher than normal to see beyond the treetops. The land of hot springs was demilitarized, and the samurai checkpoints, few and sparse, were usually ignored by the ninja rather than actually taken seriously. The samurai knew that too, but that didn't stop them from insisting. Maybe they could stop at a hot spring for a quick bath. The Raikage would probably be displeased if she left his secretary behind in the dirt. There were rumors, of course, of what he and she did, but she just quashed them down. The rakage was pretty much set in his celibate ways, and his secretary, well, there were far prettier women around. She wondered where she had been when they had assigned beauty. She had narrow cheekbones and a stern gaze, and frankly what little curves she had meant nothing when the other side learned of the fact that yes, she had a snake-killing and human flesh-eating monster in her stomach. She only drunk dated and nobody stayed around once they were sober enough to realize what they had done. It avoided the awkward mornings at least. Can you smell it? The Nibby suddenly shifted. It's near the coast, 20 miles from here. She instantaneously tensed. What is it? It smells of turtle, the two-tailed demon murmured. Such long time, it must be the Sandby. Is it moving upwards to Kumo? It appears so, the Nibby whispered. I wonder why, she added with a frown. He's not usually that reactive. Are you lying to me? Yujito asked then, only to receive the mental image of the demon cat snorting and shrugging. Do I look like I care? I wonder what freed him. Doesn't matter. He's gone from my senses. He must have plunged deep in the ocean. Yujito's eyes remained narrow for a moment more as she gazed at the horizon, before she finally stopped against the smooth surface of a tree. Mabi soon closed the distance between them, reaching her as fast as she could. We'll be taking a break here, Yujito said. 5 minutes, then we depart once more. She looked to the side. We'll find a hot spring to rest fully for one day, and then we'll make haste for Konoha. We're already behind schedule. Yes, Yujito-sama. Mabi exhaled slowly. She knew nobody enjoyed working with the Nibijin hierarchy, which was one of the reasons Yujito and I worked alone in the special Kumagakuer Corps, but she hadn't thought it was because she was a slave driver. She was probably going to melt by the time they reached a hot spring, if her muscles didn't give away the next morning, that was. Suzuki Uchiha held contempt for little things. Disorder, chaos, general noise, and bantering were on the list of things he didn't like. The fact he found himself sitting next to the Kusagakuer Kunoichi, one day in the mess hall, meant nothing. It was just a circumstance. HN. Is that all you say? The Kunoichi asked him with a half-amused smirk. I thought this training regime would be something to be excited about. They don't want me to stress my broken arm, he grumbled out. As if it could snap again. Multiple fractures of the same limb aren't something trivial, boy, the Kunoichi smirked. But you're too young to know that. He narrowed his eyes. He'd have to settle for Ami then, if this was the level of respect he'd get from the Kusa Kunoichi. What would that mean? He asked briskly. That you lack experience, she replied. It's not something you can acquire like snapping two fingers together, and it makes the difference between life and death. Why else do you think genin learn beneath Jounin sensei? To make sure they learn from more experienced shinobi. A lot of genin remain such for years, and that is why the 3 Sunin of Konoha are special. They passed together the Chiryunin exams, all 3 of them at the same time, and on their first try managed what many others could not. How can I get experience when I'm not training? Suzuki bristled slightly as he asked that. Our sensei won't even take us on missions any longer, since he's busy with the 3rd exam coming around. You could spar with your teammates, she remarked. But it seems to me you don't really like them at all, do you? No, Suzuki shook his head. One rants about defeating me, the other rants about marrying her. He shuddered. I don't like either of them. Well, the Kunoichi raised her gaze up to the ceiling. How about sparring against me, boy? Think you can take it? He raised an eyebrow. You? Are you sure you will not go crying back to your sensei afterwards? HN, the Kunoichi grumbled, mock imitating his own verse. Kunoichi don't cry, they have crocodile tears. The girl then stood up from her seat. The name is Shior, by the way, she said with a wink. Suzuki. Yeah, let's see how much your last Uchiha bull is worth on the sparring ring. He stood up quickly, following the girl out and towards the training area. Maybe he could live with disrespect after all. Meanwhile, Orochimaru looked pleased. The little orphan had done 500 paper cranes as instructed. What have we learned today then, my apprentice? The girl looked at him with wide eyes filled with fear. To do paper cranes, Orochimaru-sama. The slap made the orphan's body twist in midair before landing on the ground, so strong was the blow. No. Who cares about the paper cranes? Orochimaru snarled. What was the true purpose of doing paper cranes? You don't really think I have a need for paper cranes, right? To test me? Correct, Orochimaru smirked. Now why would I test you? Because I... She gasped for air as the thought of answering wrong actually paralyzed her in fear. I don't know. The snake Sunin's eyes narrowed to thin fissures. You don't know. Please don't kill me, Orochimaru-sama. Hebai was on the ground pleading for her life the next instant, as the snake Sunin just chuckled. Hush, child, it's normal. He smirked. Everything is fine if you don't know, he giggled. You'll find out soon enough. We're moving out soon, and you'll understand. Somehow, those words did not calm Hebai down at all. The Hokage was calmly taking long breaths from his pipe's tobacco, when the door of his office swung open with fury. Yojao Izuki walked in, followed by a sheepish Anko who seemed to be holding her head slightly low. What happened? Hiruzen's tone was calm and collected, but he had half an idea what the problem was. She lost my student. Yojao actually snarled that out with venom, which was far more than what he had ever seen the Umbu Kunoichi do before. Not actually lost, Anko piped in. Just misplaced. In the forest of death. She just had her left arm placed in a cast, her chakra sealed, and you sent her in the forest of death. Well, the purple-haired Kunoichi winced. She's going up against the Hyuga, no. You sent her in the forest of death. Geez, calm down Yojao-chan. The Takubetsu Jounin rolled her eyes. She'll be fine. I left her there at night, beasts don't usually prowl at that hour. It's the principle that counts. Yojao yelled back. You don't kidnap my students. Nobody kidnaps my students. They're my team, my soldiers, not yours. If I have to comply with the Hokage then it's fine, but they're mine. And you sent a civilian girl with no extra techniques or chakra in the forest of death. The Umbu took a deep breath. What the hell were you thinking, Anko? What the hell? Hiruzen raised an eyebrow. The Umbu guards hidden in the corners of his room actually watched the catfight with interest, grateful their masks could hide their expressions. Hey. It worked with me. Orochimaru sent his potential genin team in there, and only you came out unscathed because you were lucky. Yojao screamed back at the woman, grabbing her jacket with both of her hands. It was the bloodiest thing Konoha ever saw. The other two shinobi? They were traumatized for months. Coldly, Yojao dropped the hem of Anko's jacket. If something happens to my genin, Anko, here she narrowed her eyes. I will find you, no matter where you hide. I will come to you in the night and I will slice your throat after torturing you until you beg me to kill you. Have I made myself clear? Oh, kinky, Anko licked her lips. Ahem, Hiruzen coughed slightly. Suddenly, Yojao stood ramrod straight and with a slight blush on her face. Hokage-sama. She squeaked. I apologize. Hey Gramps. Anko smiled as she waved at the Hokage. Yojao brought me here. You've got any mission I can do to pass time? The Sandaime coughed once more. So, I have a genin lost in the forest of death. Not lost. Just misplaced. Anko exclaimed happily. Yojao-chan said I could train her to fight the Hyuga brat in the finals. I had no choice but to accept, really. Then when I went and saw that scrawny ass of a child, I thought sheesh. She has no muscles or pain tolerance. She's going to ball over when the gentle fist starts hammering down on her, and so I thought, let's give her a pain tolerance crash test. Just like what happened with the Uzumaki teammate of hers. And that's pretty much it, old man. Hiruzen exhaled slowly. He could feel a headache incoming. Uzuki-san, the Sandaime locked eyes with the ex-Umbu. Keep on training the remaining genin. Sakura Haruno will pass off as a fully fledged Mitarashi Anko apprentice for the moment, which will avoid forcing me to execute her for having stolen a genin from another commanding officer. He raised his right hand to stop the barrage of protests the Umbu was about to give. Silence. He snapped. And Mitarashi Anko? You will be bringing your apprentice alongside you on every single mission you do, and will be directly responsible for her health. He narrowed his eyes. Yuzuki, Umbu guards? Leave us. Stiffly, Yojeo nodded firmly before giving one last heated glare to Anko, who just smiled back and waved goodbye to the Team 13 sensei. The moment they were alone, the Sandaime stood up. You're walking a thin line, Anko. Anko shrugged. You asked for results, she pointed out. I'm giving them out. If a civilian kunoichi can manage to defeat an upstanding member of a clan, Hiruzen mused out, then the clan's inherently prejudiced system will have to fall apart. The Sandaime chuckled. I would have preferred you to act more subtly, but as long as there are results. Well, I've got to go now. My summons might just decide to eat the girl, rather than just keep an eye out on her. Anko winked at the old man before turning to leave, only for the Sandaime to exhale one last time. Anko, you know that, should the girl fail? Yeah, she grimaced. You'll have to get me demoted and placed somewhere in a faraway outpost because I went against the chain of command. Exactly, Hiruzen nodded. On the other hand, succeed in this, encountering the gentle fist style. His eyes glazed over, and I might just strike out the Takubitsu out of your title. Anko chuckled. All right, old man, you're on. With a flicker, the Takubitsu Jounin was gone. Hiruzen shook his head slowly, before turning to look at the village of Konoha in its splendor. Care for them and protect them, for it is among them that one will rise to take your place. He brought his right hand to gently touch the glass panel of the window. How could you think I was the right one for this job, Tobirama-sensei? He shook his head. Nobody is right for this task. Was the mantle as heavy on you, as it is for me? The old Sandaime grimaced. You were supposed to be the first non-clan shinobi to become Hokage. His eyes narrowed to Minato Namikaze's portrait. And what did you do? You ended up freeing the Kyuubi in the middle of the Dem village. Do you know the / the village suffered because you couldn't keep your pants tight? Of course not. Look at you, smiling and being condescending from your spot on the wall. The Sandaime took 3 steps towards the portrait, his eyes blazing with anger. I'm toying with the life of shinobi. Do you think I enjoy it? I hate using people. My sensei called me Sara for Kami's sake. The Sandaime dropped the head on the desk, bringing both hands to his hair as he breathed slowly. I'm too old for this, Minato. I'm too old trying to soothe old wounds, to placate the clan's rigidity, to balance everyone and everything. What you're forcing me to do, this is your entire fault. He pointed the accusing finger towards Minato. You couldn't adopt a child, huh? No. You just had to fall in love with the Kyuubi Jinhiriki and marry her. We warned you. We all did, and you didn't even care. She's strong, she'll hold it. I lost my wife and you lost your life. I lost proud shinobi and half of the village's forces, and you condemned your child to live the life of a pariah because of a crime he hadn't committed. Hiruzen gasped for air as he felt his chest constrict slightly. Not yet, he murmured, forcing his breathing to even out as he felt the telltale signs of a stroke coming and going. Not yet. The Shinigami must have heard him, because he did not die in the following minutes. I don't hate you for having followed your childishly naive heart, Minato, Hiruzen whispered. But I would be lying if I said I didn't resent you for all the pain you have caused in your selfishness, he groaned as he sat back down at his chair. Wherever you are, I hope you are watching, because I swear, I can't be the only one in pain because of this. There was a moment of silence. The world can't be so unfair, after all. The noise of the pen scribbling on the parchment slowly filled the silence afterwards, as the Sandaime returned to his paperwork with a slightly sweaty eyebrow, but his chest emptied of a heavy load. He should rant to portraits more often. The thought made him smile. He'd have to get one of Tsunade and Jiraiya, and maybe also one of Orochimaru. Maybe a double copy for Orochimaru's, the first one might accidentally burn after all. It was late at night, by the time Naruto returned home. Shimura Danzo was sitting comfortably on the armchair of the library room, a book in his lap. Naruto exhaled once, and then stepped forward. The old shinobi opened his only eye and looked with curiosity at his arrival. Naruto? You caught me asleep. I suppose old age does that, he chuckled. Nah, Danzo-sensei, Naruto said in a forced smile. Is it true? What is? He remarked, furrowing his only visible brow. You're the Yami of Shinobi, head of the counterintelligence of Konoha. Danzo breathed in slowly. It had to have been Jiraiya. The man was as subtle as an elephant, and that was only during his best days. How he managed to uphold a line of spies across the elemental countries, that was beyond his ability to reason. I was that, he remarked. I retired a long time ago. Naruto just grimaced, before nodding. You know who my father is. I do, he whispered back. The Sandaime didn't want anyone to tell me, right? Danzo nodded. That would have been bad. I take it Jiraiya of the Sun told you. It wasn't difficult to make 2 plus 2, Naruto replied as he shook his head. And it wasn't difficult to find out afterwards, really, he grimaced. Hakashi Katake. Who would use that name as a substitute for his real one? A small smile spread on Danzo's face. Very well, he nodded. And you do not feel angered? Naruto shrugged. Not much, he murmured. I mean, he had to, didn't he? And I suppose I already screamed my anger a long time ago. It's just, well, it's not fair I suppose that I couldn't know. It was done also for your safety, Danzo nodded sagely. Differently from the Kyuubi's secret, your heritage was kept a secret to everyone but a selected few, and those numbers dwindled with the passing of time, until only old geezers remained and a few trusted Umbu. Nah, sensei, Naruto whispered. Jiraiya-sama wanted to take me on as an apprentice, he looked sideways. I didn't say yes. A gen in your age would have jumped at the opportunity, Danzo said. But I suppose you are more level-headed than others, Naruto. The candlelight flickered for a moment, as Danzo's single eye fixed itself on Naruto's twin cerulean orbs. You know, if there is one thing that disgusts me, it is power without responsibility. Power should not belong to misguided fools, nor should it be free, cheap, and available to all. The sweat of your own brow should be the minimum requisite to wield power, and responsibility in using it should be what truly distinguishes the man from the child. He sighed. Yet sometimes, clans end up teaching their children devastating techniques like the chakra fireball, not caring if their precious spawns then use it to bully others, or the Hyuga's ability of the gentle fist, drilled into their muscles since youth, and that makes them able to kill by liquefying the opponent's inner organs with but a touch. There was a grimace on Danzo's face. Foolish, isn't it? Why should children barely of age be entrusted with mortal techniques? Danzo-sensei. You know that, en route, I always made sure of their loyalty before entrusting them with anything worthy. Danzo spoke calmly. Many of them, they fought and bled with nothing more than a kunao and a tanto strapped to their backs. In times of war things were different, but in peace you come to realize that handing over a technique to create a rock slide to a schizophrenic shinobi is not the right way to go. The old shinobi chuckled grimly. I lost quite a bit of flesh after the war, rather than in the middle of it. He grimaced. It's a terrible business, Naruto. It's horrible. It is heart-wrenching. It guts you to the point where there is nothing left in you but a bitter old man who walks every day through streets that are supposed to be familiar, but aren't, because you don't recognize the people who walk by. His voice trailed off, before picking up once more. And it hurts, to watch children grow into adults and then die because the enemy does not forget. It hurts to hear that your fellow comrades, your fellow shinobi, have died not of old age but of poisoning attempts, because the sons of those they killed came back for revenge. He shuddered. It is a vicious cycle, Naruto. His only eye moved back to his book. A cycle that cannot be ended as long as someone perpetrates it. Someone has to give. Someone has to fall. Someone has to give up. And nobody does, he bitterly chuckled. Nobody ever does. Danzo-sensei? Why are you telling me this? When the Chunin exams will come around, he looked at him firmly. Your actions, all of them, will be recorded for posterity. Show yourself strong, and the enemies of Konoha will think twice before attacking the village. Show yourself weak, and war might come to the village within a week. That is That is the extent of the burden you have to carry as the Jin hierarchy of the Kyuubi. Naruto sucked in air sharply as his eyes widened. He clenched the sides of his jacket, grabbing fistfuls of the fabric, before whispering back. So, I just have to win. No, Danzo replied slowly, standing up. You have to do more, he said firmly. You have to show your loyalty to the world, your disinterest, your might, your power and strength. You have to become the weapon that Konoha needs. I have to. Naruto's voice felt choked as he showered in a strange lulling sensation. Danzo-sensei's voice had something of hypnotic to it. You have to, Danzo nodded grimly. You have to fight your enemies, and you have to fight your friends. You have to win the tournament with the utmost ruthlessness, without caring for the forward protector of your enemy. Show them your strength, Naruto, and in doing so, you will save Konoha from the enemy. I will, Danzo-sensei, he replied slowly. His right hand clenched tightly. I will show no mercy to those who oppose me during the tournament. Danzo smiled. He smiled as he felt the slight dribble of blood fall down alongside his left eye. He brought down gently his sane hand over the boy's shoulder and, with a comforting pat, he whispered then. I'm sure you will, Naruto. I'm sure you will. The weeks passed with ease after that, in a sort of hazy dream. He trained, he learned some sort of strange Baijuadama, he trained with his Tonto against Kakashi, he felt strange, but he couldn't pinpoint why. It was as if he was missing something important. The day the Chunin exams started, Naruto Uzumaki was quietly standing in line together with the rest of the genin. To his right, he could see Sai calmly standing as if the time past hadn't changed him at all. Dickless. Pervert. They nodded to one another as they spoke, before turning to face the proctor, Kakashi Hatake. The rest of the genin hopeful Chunin were present, some more nervous, some less. Haruno Sakura, however, was still missing. She can't be late, Naruto muttered. We have to pass the exam together. Dickless, stop being nervous, Sai quipped. There's still time. The Hokage bit down on his pipe calmly, as he watched the genin in line down below from the cage box. He had received enough complaints about Sakura Haruno's disappearance from her parents, and if now the girl didn't show up, that wasn't going to be fine at all. Where had Anko brought the girl to begin with? Konoha ninja, Unaki grumbled from his side. Always lacking in something, be it quality, quantity, or punctuality. Now, Tsuchikage, the Dakigakuer Kage remarked with a low grumbling noise, that is a serious offense. The Dakigakuer Kage had long spiky hair, dark eyes, and a goatee. He wore a dark blue jacket, gray pants, sandals, and a bandana that held his hair out of his face. The robes he wore weren't white as those normally of the cage, but more of a dark green color. His bodyguard was a young dark-skinned girl, with dark green hair and a sort of tomboyish grin plastered on her face. Thank you, Suiendano, Hiruzen replied calmly. But there will be no need. I am sure they have merely been delayed. To be late is to be dead, the Kyumigakuer ambassador remarked dryly. The Nibijin hierarchy looked towards the Iwagakuer Kage with a calm ease, before drifting her gaze to the Hokage and then the Dakigakuer Kage. What kunoichi can this, Haruno be, if she is late to her own graduation? Be as it may, the Otagakuer Kage answered calmly. It is not our decision whether to proceed or not with the exams. They are hosted by Konoha, thus it should be their rights to decide. His cage clothes were a striking deep purple, which contrasted sharply with his gray eyes and hair. Indeed, the Kaze Kage added next. Arashi-san, while young, is correct. And considering just who is supposed to be coming to interrupt this spectacle, it is for the best we take as much time as possible, to grant more time to the civilians to evacuate. Is this why you are here, Kazekage-sama? The Dakigakuer Kage asked with a slight smirk. I wonder how you feel about your youngest dying at the hand of a Konoha shinobi. I am actually thankful, the Kaze Kage shot back immediately, with a death glare powerful enough to make Suien swallow harshly. My youngest was a menace which cost me far many shinobi of the sand. The people are happier now than before, and we have already received reparations for the loss of the Ichibai which will bring both Konoha and Suna closer in the future. Indeed, the Hokage quipped before taking a deep breath. I will now announce the beginning of the exams. I'll have to. There was a flash of light, soon followed by a giant scroll coming down from one corner of the arena as the words Mitarashi Anko's sexy apprentice arrives were written on the scroll. Those soon followed a pink blur, which landed, with a vicious smirk, in the middle between Sai and Naruto. The blur's hands then shot out to grab both Naruto's and Sai's neck with her arm and hug them both while doing a victory sign and sticking her tongue out. One of Sakura's eyes was closed in a wink, even thought there was a nasty gash running across it as if a feral beast had clawed it. Her sleeveless fishnet shirt showed off her arms, filled with small nicks and scars that could only result from forcefully parrying shurikens with only the bare flesh. Her hair was short, with streaks of purple and green running across it. She hummed a nice tune as she let go of her teammates, before stretching widely for a moment. She wore a short brown mini-skirt that came close to indecency, and beneath her fishnet shirt one could clearly see a one-piece black dress, the only sign of modesty somewhere on her body. Her left ear had a piercing apparently, as a small green jewel was stuck in her earlobe. Ahem, Kakashi coughed slightly. Haruno Sakura. The pink-haired girl nodded vivaciously. You're late. Somehow, the deeply settled irony of the statement escaped everyone, except those who knew Kakashi hate's tardiness. Sakura blinked once, and then she flipped him the bird. Kakashi just chuckled. Meanwhile, at the hospital of Konohagakure no Sato, Hinata Hyuga watched from her wheelchair the arena through the television settled in the common room. Her father had actually visited her and told what had happened, and what she had to do from there on. She hadn't even cried. She had just numbly pleaded to watch the Chunin exams. She's entrust her feelings, her will, to simply watch Naruto-kun winning the tournament. She held no doubt the boy would win in her heart. Standing there with a wool sheet over her unresponsive legs, watching the first two contestants settling on the ring as a group of sick children awed at the two fighters. She could have become a nurse, had she been born in a civilian family. She could have been the kind lady talking to the elderly Kunoichi who was looking with interest at the screen, or the burly and stern-looking matron who had a golden heart and held two small children on her shoulders to let them see the television better. Yet there she was. A cripple who couldn't use her legs. A worthless Hyuga who was good enough only to be used as a political marriage piece, to then be discarded in a corner of the house like some sort of grown-out vest never to be taken out again from the closet. She held both of her delicate hands to her chest as she bit her lower lip in pain, a pain that came from her heart and soul and not from her body. Her father was a stern piece of ice next to her. She supposed he was so much beyond being disgusted that he simply didn't care if she actually died there or not. Father. She whispered. Yes, Hinata. I'm sorry. Hayashi Hyuga took a deep breath and composed himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, a trickle of sweat running down his forehead. He could do this. He just had to say, it wasn't your fault. Sure, it was to admit weakness and a Hyuga never admitted weakness, but as it was right now, there wasn't any reason to insist. Hinata was no longer a viable Kunoichi. He didn't have to force her to grow up stern and tough. He could let her go. He could act kindly if he wished to. He didn't say those words. He said others. You should be. The girl just sadly lowered her head after that. Hayashi would have kicked himself in the head. And as the silence grew in the room, the announcer finally exclaimed. And the first match of the Chunin exams, Niji Hyuga against Sakura Haruno will now begin. And with those words, the Chunin's final exam began. Chapter 29, the second announces the drama. There was so much blood on her hands it didn't even wash away properly, not that she had tried. There was so much pain running around her body, dancing in the sun's glare. She had never seen pain before, it was strange and exciting. There were quite a bit of colors around her too. Naruto was orange-like, Sai was dressed in navy blue and looked like Sasuke. The proctor looked strange too, was he laughing at her? She'd give him the bird. It was the only thing she could do after all, horrible proctor, telling her she's late when they are all early. She had felt safe hugging her teammates, because it meant she was still alive and could still feel. It had been so cold for so long, she loved them because they protected her, and they loved her because she protected them. The scary purple woman was a whore. Yes, she was a bad whore who had to die slowly for taking her away from her team. She kept on the smiling face and the half-dumb grinning even as her teammates had to leave her behind. She was sad because of that, but she'd meet them again soon. She just had to make the white-eyed enemy die. Make him stay still on the ground drenched in blood. There was so much blood on her hands, wasn't there? Hara no Sakura, the silver-haired proctor stated, and Niji Hyuga, he retorted pointing his single-eyed gaze at the Hyuga branch member, begin. Niji had no qualms hitting girls. It took him the moment to activate his Byakugan however, to understand something was wrong with that particular girl. She wasn't running away from him, but closing in with a kunao in hand. He scoffed at such a crude display, his left hand shooting forward to counter-strike the girl's wrist, to shatter her bone and then deliver a devastating gut punch to the pink-haired imbecile that believed she could win against a taijutsu user who had trained extensively in the art for years. Really, what did she think? That she could win by training hard for as little as she had and defeat him? There was no dodging his counter-strike. There was no strange technique or chakra spike. His punch actually connected with the girl's guts and settled the match in a single strike. Only a tiny amount of chakra actually escaped the girl's chakra coils an instant before his fist connected. There was no genjutsu or strange other technique afterwards, only the body of the pink-haired genin crumbling down on the ground. At least, that was what he had expected to happen. The girl instead, she just smiled as blood came out of her mouth, without falling down. He was pretty sure he had hit her hard. Boom, she choked out through pained groans. Her black shirt, hidden beneath her fishnet one, opened up with that single whispered word. His attack hadn't cleanly landed on her stomach, but against tags that had been tied to the girl's skin, and which she had activated with a precise chakra pulse in the same instant as his arm had shot forward to deliver his own devastating blow. A thick cloud of pollen, poisonous vapors, itching powders and whatnot exploded and passed through Sakura's fishnet shirt within mere instants, engulfing the Hyuga before he could even reason what had happened. Niji screamed in pain as he began to furiously claw at his own eyes, rolling on the ground. Sakura was in her happy world. She was in a place where the pain couldn't reach her, because she knew that if she returned to the non-happy world she was going to suffer. She was in the happy world where nothing bad happened. She was in the world where everyone and everything was fine. She was happy. Her skin was on fire, her body convulsing and filled with spasms, but she was fine. All the poisons had a short duration. They meant to make the body spasm for a few minutes at most. She just had to relax and let them run their course. Really, she was in a happy place. It was a happy place, where her parents loved to stay at home and where her teammates were there for her. She wasn't going to let some dumb Hyuga prick hurt her teammates, not a chance in hell. She'd get him first. She stopped convulsing after a short while, taking a few steps forward as the kunao she had been clutching with her now broken wrist seemed to be glinting and whispering to her, "Kill him." She couldn't move Mr. Shiny Kunao however. It didn't want to move. Therefore, she took out Mr. Shiny sword and tried to plunge it deeply into the Hyuga bastard's eyes. It didn't work because the proctor decided against it, and stopped her from executing the Hyuga. "Hara no Sakura," he said then, and she finally heard him and grinned dumbly. "You have won the match." "Yeah," she whispered in her low voice, before spitting out blood from her mouth and wobbling all the way out of the arena while bobbing her head up and down as if half drooling. "Medic Nin." Kakashi snapped his fingers, letting the Chiryunin shinobi arrive and take care of both the winner and the loser. Naruto had watched the entire fight happen in front of his eyes, from his position on the box of the contestants. His knuckles clenched hard against the metal of the guardrail as he ground his teeth. What had happened? Why had that happened? "Niji lost," the girl of Team 9 murmured from the other side of the box, her face pale. "How did she?" "I don't know," Naruto suddenly snapped, "but I'm going to find out who tried to get my teammate killed and I will kill her so brutally they will talk of it in the years to come." His eyes shone crimson for a moment, as the cages up in the box appeared to be deliberating over the match. "Interesting match," the Kaze cage remarked. "Short-lived, but then again that's the way it should be. Poison used seemed to be a fairly normal blend. No tolerance to poison in the Hyuga. I recognized a few of the herbs used by the color," the Takigakuer chief replied. It is a simple but effective idea actually, a kill switch based on the eventual lack of chakra. The precision to execute it however must be astonishing, the Otogakuer leader remarked. The tags had to be primed with chakra before the lack of chakra forced the paper tags to disperse, and she still took a devastating blow to her own chakra coils. For her to stand after that, with a broken wrist I might add, and try to finish the enemy? The pain must have been excruciating. Did she drug herself to numb the pain? It would explain her behavior and her late arrival. She couldn't waste time with the drug in her bloodstream. A tricky way to deal with a Hyuga, I admit, the Hokage acquiesced. Ultimately a one-shot skill, but still, the principle is workable. Mentally, Hiruzen decided to give a nice tongue lashing to Anko for her apparent decision to overlook the long-term effects of such training. She comes from a civilian background, correct? The Nibijin Hiraki remarked calmly as her narrow gaze went for a moment to the contestant stands, where the brief spike of a chakra that felt familiar to her was stirring the two-tailed demon from its slumber. Indeed, the Hokage nodded. That amount of devotion and self-sacrifice to the cause is something that any Chiryunin should possess. Someone helped her with the tags, the Nibi said dryly. The execution was top mark, but the before and after, I doubt she will be able to stand for the next fight. It was a kamikaze attack, inexcusable on a battlefield unless the very last moment and on the brink of defeat, and even then, explosive tags would have been better. I am with Hokage Dano on this, the Kazekage replied. And the point was illustrated clearly with or without explosive tags. She is Chiryunin rank. Loath as I am to admit it, there is little more to say, the Otogakuer chief murmured. It seems the Byakugan itself can be countered with simple ink, what a terrible thing. Fuinjutsu has always been a dangerous art, even a so-called prodigy like Niji Hyuga can be defeated with wits, Hiruzen said. He quickly scribbled the Chiryunin rank beneath Sakura Haruno's name. The fight had been short, anticlimactic, shinobi-like. The next match may begin. The Hokage exclaimed then. With a flash of speed, Naruto Uzumaki descended in the arena with crimson-red chakra lapping around his entire frame. The ground cracked under his mere presence as his crimson orbs held a gaze of pure murder. His right hand slammed in a fist against his left, before he snarled. Well. Tenten Sato swallowed nervously. She had been present when the boy had begun the fight that had ended with the death of the Suna ninja. She had seen just what he could do before running away with her team. There was no way she could win, whatever bloodline the boy had made him a monster, but she had to try. At least, if she put up a good show, she had a chance to become a Chiryunin and move on to more rewarding missions, find a Jounin to apprentice to and be one step closer to becoming like Tsunade of the Sunin, her idol. She jumped down in the arena, taking her distance from her opponent and clenching on her scrolls packed with weapons. She had trained for this, she could win this. Naruto's right foot tapped against the ground. Well. He smirked. Are we going to begin? No killing, if it can be avoided, Kakashi spoke. The silver-haired shinobi locked eyes with Naruto's crimson orbs and Tenten's dark ones, before finally whispering out, "You may now begin." Tenten jumped backwards, as she extracted 3 scrolls one after the other in rapid succession from her back. Chakra poured as they unclasped, letting projectile after projectile fly out and land in a continuous barrage against the spot where Naruto was standing still. Many landed against the boy's shoulders, slamming into his chest or his body as he simply widened his arms with a feral grin and a look that was half of ecstasy and half of rage. "Hey, girl," he snarled as shurikens the size of his body tore through his jacket, their jagged edges and points tearing his skin and making him bleed. "Are you the trap specialist of your team?" What if I am?" She yelled back at the boy who didn't even seem fazed from the copious amount of blood lost, or from the amount of metal that was currently piercing his entire frame. "Then I have a debt to repay," he snarled. "A debt of blood." As he said that, all the weapons, the projectiles frown, all the pieces and bits of metal that had embedded in his skin flew out of his body with a vigorous explosion of metallic shrapnel. Naruto's entire body shrouded itself in the chakra cloak of the Kyuubi, giving him a fox-like appearance as twin tails swashed away behind him. And let it be known, that the Kyuubi's Jinhiriki always pays his debts back tenfold. His right hand pushed itself forward as a chakra claw advanced on the scared Tenten, who barely dodged it. The caustic chakra managed to wound her cheek slightly from its mere presence as the ferocious sting it caused made the long-range user wince in pain. The small nick on the girl's cheek increased in size drastically, leaving behind an actually wide gash on her side. What is left to grow too much, starts to rot, Naruto sing-sung, as he lowered himself on all fours. Kakashi wanted to call the match in that moment. He wanted to, but he was too late. The boy's speed was beyond what he, without the Sharingan, could see. Soon, both hands of Naruto Uzumaki had plunged deeply into Tenten's own stomach, piercing her entire body apart as they emerged reddish with blood on the other side. And the screams. They made him shudder. In the sewer-like mind, the Kyuubi watched with amusement the scene unfold. Beyond the bars, Naruto was looking in shock at the same thing. His skin was pale and his eyes wide. He hadn't wanted that to happen, probably. What's going on? Naruto screamed from within his own mind, looking at the Nine Tails as if he had the answer to it. He actually did. Look above you, Naruto, he replied soothingly. Naruto did just that, and as he did, he blanched. A twisted red and black eye looked at him from above the ceiling, spinning wildly more and more. It resembled a sort of three-pronged shuriken, but it just felt wrong. It felt evil just by looking at it. The power of the Mangekyo Sharingan, the Kyuubi snarled from his own cage. Terrible power, cursed and wretched and stolen from me, the nine-tailed fox roared and laughed at the same time. How it feels, I wonder. He chuckled. How it feels, to be betrayed. To be forced against one's own will? To have freedom taken away and never given back? How does it feel, Naruto Uzumaki, to be myself? What are you talking about? Naruto asked softly, taking a step back and falling in the water from the shock of recoiling from the thing. What is that thing? You can't remember. The Koda Amatsukami steals and rapes the mind and the memories. The power of unbridled malice, uncontrolled hatred, unquenchable thirst for vengeance birthed it. I offered it as a gift to the firstborn of the Sage of the Six Paths, a gift of friendship, from brother to brother. He laughed bitterly. This is what he made of it. It was supposed to ensure loyalty between friends, it bred domination and tyranny. Naruto heard a sickening sound all around him, as the water seemed to reflect his Kyuubi-influenced form attack and tear apart the sides of the kunoichi he was battling. How could the girl still be alive? Why was no one intervening? Show no mercy to your enemies, the Kyuubi's crimson eyes shone brightly as the demon spoke. Be the weapon Konoha wishes you to become. Well, who am I to refuse such an offer? Stop it! He yelled. Stop it? Why? It was a third voice that asked, with a tone all too familiar to Naruto, because it was his own. It's so much fun. Sickening dark red eyes and a feral smirk settled on a face identical to his a few meters away. Well, Naruto? Nothing to say. His clone opened his arms wide. No saying hello to your brother in anguish? I felt all alone down here, you know? Wallowing in misery, hearing the big fuzzy ball snarl and rant about malice and hatred of the world, watching you go around smiling and acting like the glares and the stares didn't matter. He smirked. Then thankfully you changed a bit. It was nice, you know, no longer being left in a corner. Silence and muttering of how we were going to kill them, but it lasted too little, his dark self whispered. Too little time in the light makes me go mad, you know. His clone brought up his right hand clenched in a fist as he growled. It's time for payback, Naruto. They have to pay and suffer and scream. They dared talk behind our backs, act as if we were scum, when they should have honored us. They should have kissed the ground where we walked. They should have held us up high as heroes, not slammed us in the dirt like monsters. His dark self laughed out bitterly as he pointed his finger to the ceiling. That thing over there? It grants me freedom. Finally, I am free. Your deepest desires, your darkest secrets, that person at the market? Let us slaughter him. That woman who hates us and gives us those nasty glares. Let's kill her son and rape her daughter, before feasting on her blood like we should. They will bow to us. All of them, they will know our power and tremble beneath our strength. Together, brother, let's do this. The dark Naruto extended his hand towards him. We are the same, you and I, Together, we can fight them. Together, we can defeat them. Together, we can cleanse this world of the darkness that inhabits it. Together, don't you want this? Don't you want to be free? To be unchained, unclasped to ideals that do not belong to you? Don't you want revenge for the way they treated you? Another strong impact resounded as the girl's chest was literally ripped apart by the strength of one of his blows, and yet she was still alive. He was torturing her by tearing her own body apart and keeping her alive at the same time. Naruto felt sick. Well, they will all die anyway, brother. The dark him took a step forward, and as he did the water around him turned to grime and dark rotting blood, expanding like a sickening patch of oil on the liquid. But together we can make their deaths painless and swift. No, he shook his head. No, he growled out. So you refuse me? His dark self replied. You refuse my might, my power, the strength that could guide you flawlessly to freedom? And for who? A half-sociopath who makes pretty drawings? A sensei that you barely know? A girl who let you down and then acts like a lunatic on a drug high? An old man who views you like a hero and does nothing to act upon it? Is this what you are exchanging your freedom for? These rotten remains of a putrid society unfit to exist? These stench-filled bodies that will eventually rot and die. They're not like that. Naruto screamed. No? Then look. A sickening crunch, a horrendous sound of something squishy being taken out, and when his gaze turned to the puddle of water, the girl he had been fighting had its entrails removed. Her eyes were wide in fear as the claw-like hand of Naruto held steadily onto them, healing and at the same time burning and ripping through her flesh. The girl's screams echoed throughout the sewer-like area now filled with the stench of blood and the moans of the wounded. She no longer had a lower half of her body, but she was still alive. She was still alive even as her entrails were on the ground, her upper half torn apart and held by the same chakra hands that had attacked her before. She was constantly rotting and healing. The pain was. Let me go please, it hurts please, please hurt it hurts please see. The girl's screams turned into a cacophony of noise and sounds as Naruto clutched both of his ears. He shuddered and trembled as he fell on the ground, his knees sinking deeply within the dirty water that seemed to sprout half-rotten hands that clasped at his clothes, his vest, his flesh, and seemed to be pulling him down through the water. In that final, fleeting, instant, Naruto Uzumaki's throat let out a single half-wretched sob. Enough. And then chakra chains shot throughout the entire room, twisting and pulling away at the rot that was encrusting the walls, binding tightly against the dark self of Naruto and pulling him within the seal just as the body of the real Naruto was stopped from drowning and gently brought back on his feet. The noises and the screams of pain soon subsided. Naruto felt himself return to the world of the living, as the chakra surrounding him disappeared in a flash. On the ground, laid rotten and still twitching was the body of his opponent. Her blood soaked the grounds. Naruto's eyes looked from her dying form to that of the proctor, who seemed to be holding himself still as a stone. I won, Naruto remarked calmly. It was enough to start the avalanche of screams from the people in the stands. It was enough to make Kakashi return to his senses long enough to weakly nod. Death was something that happened in the tournament. It was something rare. Something that wasn't meant to be among shinobi of the same village, but that happened all the same when mistakes were made. He had been so lost in his thoughts and remembrance of the Kyuubi's attack when the thick malice of the beast's chakra had blanketed the area, that he hadn't even called the victor. If he had, would it have changed anything? The first blow would have been fatal anyway, and he knew he should have called the match there and then, but he couldn't. He couldn't because there was no way he could link that boy covered in blood and with crimson eyes to the one he had been teaching till then. He hoped against all hopes that his sensei's son wouldn't turn out as a bloodthirsty monster, that his words on not wanting to kill anyone and on not claiming revenge were real. He had told him that much, when he had come clean on knowing who his father was. Then this had happened. He had outright murdered, toyed with, even, eaten the girl. Tenshinsuto was an orphan from the war. She had been living in the orphanage for a while until she had moved out for one of the one-room apartments the genin got from the state. And there she now was, dead. Nobody deserved to die in their village, and nobody especially deserved that type of death. This was only supposed to be some normal exam. Sure, deaths were possible, but up above, in the cage stands, the Hokage was trying to act like the calmest person. The Nibijin hierarchy was actually the calm one. The Tsuchikage was halfway through a shit-eating grin and the other allies of Konoha were instead failing to act calm. Was this display designed to impress us on the ruthlessness of your village, Hokage-sama? You must have recovered your losses quite proficiently, if you are willing to see your own shinobi die at the hand of your Jinhiriki. He does appear to be quite in control, if a bit on the sadistic side. Nothing she couldn't kill or face, however. She was confident that she defeated him in speed and power, as well as experience. Unless he could control more tales of power, then it was clear who was. You would die. The Nibi simply spoke 3 words with her unnatural calmness. The Kyuubi is different. He has always been different. She actually added some words to her shortcut sentence, before returning to her usual mask of indifference. How can he be different? He is no different than you or the Hakubi, Yujito grumbled in her mind. And you could give me more information about him. I'd just ask B to ask the Hakubi anyway. Then do so, the Nibi remarked placidly. It is not my task to answer your questions. I believe you should pull him out of the exam, Hokage Dano, the Otogakuer chief spoke. He will without a doubt be a Chiryunin. We saw his might right now, to see him fight again would be. Don't you dare. The Tsuchikage actually laughed at that. I want to see him fight my granddaughter. If he's really in control, then he won't kill her, will he? And if he isn't, then this is only bark and no bite. And if he does kill your granddaughter? Suien replied. Will you claim it your fault? Tisk, if he can manage to outspeed me, then I will retire from my position, Unaki remarked with a dry chuckle. Well, is your proctor daydreaming or what? Have him take the corpse out of the field, unless he wants to leave it there for the next bout. Meanwhile, in the hospital's common room, Hinata was desperately clutching onto the wool cloth that covered her legs. Her eyes were wide and trembling, tears streaking down her cheeks as she had just watched the carnage happen in a blur. From the small screen, all she had managed to glimpse was Naruto suddenly turn into a red blur, before slamming into his opponent, and then the screams had begun. They had been so horrid even the children had to leave, and her father had tried to get her out too. She had remained instead, her hand having firmly grasped her father's arm when he had attempted to take her away. She had said no to him for that, and he had let her. Hinata had watched, but mostly she had heard the screams. She had seen the blood fly, the bits and pieces fall off, and she had felt sick, but she hadn't retched. She had fought against the queasiness in her stomach and had held in a vice-like grip of steel her father's hand with both of hers, like she did when she was little and he was still kinder. What is that? She whispered in fright. What, where is Naruto-kun in that? She couldn't see Naruto-kun. She saw a beast of red and crimson, a monster born of darkness. She saw nothing resembling the laughing blonde-haired person with deep striking blue eyes she admired from afar. You know the Jinhiriki? Hayashi asked calmly. The boy had practically announced it to the world. He doubted the third's law was still in effect after that. He was slightly perplexed at the kun suffix, but said nothing for the moment. He could school his displeasure perfectly after all. And Naruto-kun, Hinata stammered out. He was always smiling in class, she shyly whispered. I admired him. He was a failure, like me, she croaked out, but he always smiled. He fought on, she shook her head slowly. That isn't Naruto-kun, she whispered again. It can't be him. A Jinhiriki is the host of a Baijiryu, Hayashi spoke without really knowing why he was telling his daughter that. When the Kyuubi attacked Konoha, the Yondaime had to seal it in a baby, he remarked. That baby was Naruto Uzumaki, an orphan. He has the Kyuubi inside of him. Yes, Hayashi nodded once firmly. And Jinhiriki, they are renowned for being weapons of mass destruction. The Ichibai, the weakest of them all, it could raise Tsunagakuer to the ground if given time. Fuinjutsu, the art of sealing, was the only known mean to counteract the demons. The first Hokage sealed the demons and handed them away to ensure peace, but then somehow the Kyuubi got free and attacked Konoha. And Naruto-kun wasn't liked because of that. Indeed, the head of the Hyuga clan whispered. Why hold him prisoner, when killing the baby would give Konoha years of peace. The fools knew nothing of sealing or demons. They didn't know that the demons simply cannot die, but are reformed countless times until sealed. He looked at Hinata then. You all weren't supposed to know. It wasn't just for his safety, but to ensure the enemy villages didn't attack Konoha in a moment of weakness. The tale that had to spread was of a mature shinobi holding the Kyuubi, to keep the enemies away. Just as Hinata nodded numbly, somewhere else in the same hospital Sakura was slowly opening her eyes. She actually felt somewhat nice. There was a sort of peace in her body. It lasted 3 seconds, and then pain racked her entire frame as she felt her muscles as if they were combusting in flames. The convulsion stopped a moment later, but by then her peace of mind was shattered. She saw the drip and the needle inserted in her arm. She saw the nurse entering with hurry to look at her. She even heard her speak, but it didn't matter to her. Teammates. She whispered. Her voice felt weak. The teammates were important. It was the only thought she had managed to keep in her mind. That and going boom when the time was needed. She didn't actually remember much else. Only the forest that looked at her and didn't see her, but prey to eat. The forest was evil. She was going to burn it down when she had the time. The bad guy was white-eyed, and she hoped he had died with her boom. Even if he hadn't, she was going to kill him anyway. The purple-haired whore had told her so. She had to be broken, and then mended again, but since they didn't have much time she would just break her and give her something to do while broken. Yeah, that was all there was. Nothing more, really. She said something about doing it multiple times, something of a failsafe with captured enemy shinobi exchanged back. She convulsed again. The nurse called for a doctor, didn't she? There were no doctors in the forest. She had bled and used leaves to heal herself. Not the poisonous ones, of course. She remembered Sai's words on those. And Naruto had told her of food to eat and not to. She had daydreamed of being there with her teammates. It had been nice. Were her Naruto stick and her Sai stick still back there? The tiger's blood felt warm. No, there were no tigers. She was safe, so why was she holding the doctor with the needle on the ground? Oh, she had broken his arm. Accidents happen, don't they? 2 big bad shinobi entered afterwards, and so she had to snarl at them and attack them. It was the only way to survive in the jungle after all. Prey or predator, right? She was done being the prey. That's the reason no one should train beneath Anko, one of the 2 shinobi interns of the hospital muttered after gripping the girl's waist and holding her still, so that the second one could pierce her neck with a sedative. Outside the room in shock were both of the girl's parents looking inside with wide eyes. The woman's right hand was to her mouth, while the father's fists clenched tightly. Sakura? Honey. Mabuki whispered with a pleading tone as she took a step forward. Stay back, ma'am, the nurse said, moving away from the doctor who was cradling his broken arm. It's going to be all right once we get a Yamanaka in here. Keep her strapped, the doctor snapped out with a bit more of anger than normal. After all, he had his arm broken by the girl. And sedated. Once they've taken her memories and placed them under lock, have her start therapy with a psychiatrist. What is going on? Kaizashi asked then, his eyes moving from his daughter's unresponsive body who was laying in the bed now, and was being strapped by the interns to the doctor who had a grimace on his face. She's not the first one to break after a traumatic experience, sir. It happens regularly. That's why Chiyunin above get regular visits to the psychiatrist. We were warned on who trained her, but well. The doctor sighed. We couldn't risk drugging her with anything heavy, not with the state her kidneys are right now, and her inner chakra coils. They're scrambled. What does it mean? It means, the man's eyes settled on Kaizashi, that it will take a while for her to heal. Physically? She'll be fine in a few weeks. Mentally? It might take months for her to assimilate whatever she has gone through, and knowing Anko Mitarashi, it had to be something horrible. But, she'll be back to her normal self, right? Mabuki asked, as her right hand went to caress a lock of pink hair that was half dyed green. This isn't dye, she whispered then. It's grass. We don't usually make predictions on these cases, the doctor replied. Sometimes, they heal. Sometimes, they don't. Most of the time they simply keep on functioning like time bombs. We generally try and suggest them to find an administrative work spot, somewhere nice and quiet like the archives or the likes, but only a few actually listen. I see, doctor. Yakushi, the doctor replied. Now, if she wakes up and there is no one around, do not agitate her. If she says something, then be condescending, but do not actually let her leave, understood? Don't undo the straps, and if she acts violently or risks harming herself, call a nurse. I know she is your daughter, sir, but she is also a kunoichi. They can be extremely violent when in this state. The doctor's sane hand went up to squeeze gently Kaizushi's shoulder. I insist on this. Do not under any circumstance attempt anything alone. Call a nurse, an intern, or someone if she wakes up with only you in the room. I understand. Good, and with that the doctor left to have his broken arm placed in a cast. The interns and the nurse left soon afterwards, and in the end, only the two of them remained. They both sat next to Sakura's prone form on the bed. My little girl, Mabuki whispered. She looks so peaceful. It was only months ago that she went on about the Uchiha, Kaizushi murmured with a hard tone. If I had known this would happen. Why her? Why not someone else? I don't. A sharp knock at the door interrupted the couple's talking, and they both looked towards it as it opened slowly. A man with dark short hair and a stern expression entered next, his left hand holding onto the clinical records of Sakura probably. Excuse me, he replied, closing the door behind him. I'm Dr. Toruin. Kaizushi felt a slight itching sensation up his arm, and he barely glanced towards his wife to see her cross her arms over her chest and look at the doctor with a look of worry. She was also scratching her left shoulder. Is everything all right, doctor? Dr. Yakushi said. Oh, don't worry, the doctor smiled then. Everything will be fine. The corpse of Tenten was removed from the arena, just as Naruto climbed back up on the contestant's box. His hands were still covered in dried blood when the green spandex-clad boy from the same team as the girl pounced and grabbed him by the clothes. You! He screamed with tears in his eyes. First Niji, then Tenten. You monster! How could you? You! Shut up, the Otagaku or Kunoichi snapped. Your teammate was trash for losing anyway. In Oto, if you lose you die. It's as simple as that. She rolled her eyes. At least someone is taking the exam seriously. Leave the brat alone. Why, you most unyouthful person. Let go of my teammate. Sai's voice was cold and composed, but the kunai placed at the neck of Rock Lee was showing the exact opposite. You can fight him if you win the tournament. Naruto staggered back as Rock Lee let him go, before turning and moving to the far end corner of the box they were in. I will avenge my teammate with the fire of youth, he snapped, pointing his finger straight at Naruto. You are not worthy of being my youthful rival, but I will avenge Tenten. Sai's eyes fixated on Naruto, as the blonde boy returned the gaze with a mixture of worry and perplexity. What happened, Dickless? I don't know. He whispered out those words just as, beneath them, Kuratsuki and Kidomaru began to battle. With the sound of battle raging on, nobody heard the soft footsteps of Orochimaru, as all around him the village burned and was torn apart piece by his men. Leave no survivors. He barked out as he wielded the kusanagi and pointed forward. Come on. Let us be the wind that makes the windmill spin. Let us bring change to this world. For our future, for perfection. Let us fight and destroy these rotten bastards. Kill them all. Destroy them all. Let none survive our wrath. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. And as a single man hundreds of soundnin converged as one against the titanic structure of wood that was Takigaku's main defensive position. The village hidden by the waterfall would soon fall, and as the secrets of the hero water would be delivered onto him, he couldn't help but laugh. Hebai was next to him, shuddering and slightly worried. Orochimaru-sama had inked some sort of seal on her neck, but hadn't activated it yet. She couldn't help but feel worried because, well, of course their leader wouldn't just kill her, but then again. There were screams all around her, as the lack of a cage, of a chief or of their jinhiriki actually facilitated the defeat of the small and enclosed village. There was nothing but death all around her. It reminded her of home, somewhat. Chapter 30, the third delivers the antagonist. Naruto had long stopped using his own tiny voice in his mind to calm himself down since a long time before. When he was little, and couldn't understand why the people whispered at him or left him alone, he used to talk to himself and play by himself. Sure, he didn't like that, but he also didn't want to admit the truth that maybe the other people were the one wrong and not him. He had done nothing, but if the bad children were those ignored and left in a corner, the ones that didn't get ice cream or the likes, then something was bad with him too. He had tried, really. He had tried hard to please the people around him, but when it failed, because undoubtedly it did fail, he had retreated into himself more than once. It never lasted long. There always was something or someone that soon brought him back to his normal self. Like a child ignoring their parents' orders just because they weren't around that afternoon, or being given by mistake something like any other child before they realized who he was. He had always made it a point to smile brightly at that, to show he was just like the others. Then, of course, this had to happen. He could hear them, the whispers filled with malice. He could see them, the people in the arena gazing at him hard, or with fear. He could feel their gaze upon his skin, trying to tear apart his very body with just their looks. He didn't know what had taken him. He didn't know why he had done that. He couldn't remember. Naruto watched with dispassionate feelings how Kurotsuka tore through Kodomaru's tactics of using steel wire and archery with the usage of walls of stone and disappearing in the ground. Iwagakure was famous for its strategy of attrition against attackers. Their fortifications, lines of defenses and whatnot had held against Konoha up to the point the Yondaime had created his high ration. After that, they had settled for peace. Kidomaru actually yielded before Kurotsuka could deliver a fatal blow, and soon the proctor raised its hand to signal the next two contestants to come down. Sai looked from the arena being cleared and returned to its neutral state to Naruto, before slowly giving the blonde boy a pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry. You'll always be Dickless no matter what you do." Naruto's hands clenched against the guardrail of the box, before slowly nodding to Sai. "Go down there, pervert." "The spandex freak is already there," he replied in a whisper, pointing to where Rock Lee was already standing making flexion. "Kick his ass." "I'll stab him, hurts more," Sai replied calmly before making his way down. Sai reached for his position opposite to his opponent, and slowly brought his right hand hovering over his paintbrush. Imagine. Materialize. Replicate. He concentrated on the feeling of yin chakra as he created a similar scene to that depicted, but with him being a bit closer than reality. This would have given him the advantage the moment the fight began, because if the enemy came up short with taijutsu, then all he'd have to do was to stick a blade to the boy's neck and be done with it. "You may begin." As soon as the proctor said that, Sai's hand finished the single motion hand sign required for slamming his genjutsu into his opponent's brain. The next instant, a green spandex mass flew through the ground directly at him. Only the root training gave Sai enough time to hastily move his face to the side and avoid the blow that would have otherwise knocked him out. The strength was palpable, sending ripples across the air and forcing Sai's neck hair up as the boy's eyes briefly widened in disbelief. The next instant, Sai barely managed to unclasp the ink bottle. As soon as the tap was uncorked, the second hit broke through his left arm, twisting it as the taijutsu enemy viciously grasped on the limb to execute an extremely fast set of punches to his guts. Before the pain became blinding, Sai's ink infused with his chakra. He couldn't substitute, because the hold of the genin was too strong for him to slip away. Therefore, Sai did the second best thing he could in his pain-riddled brain. He made the ink fly directly in the face of Rock Lee. The boy loosened the hold and jumped backwards, just as Sai found himself on one knee breathing hard, as his only sane limb was now clutching his stomach. Mental images of internal bleeding and broken bones already coalesced. The question however remained, how had he avoided the genjutsu? "You unyouthful person, my anger is not to you," the boy exclaimed as his hands went to remove the ink from his eyes. Sai fumbled with his sane hand to a red-colored ink bottle, unclasping it. "Stand aside, for the fire of youth will avenge Tenten when I meet your teammate." "Will you kill him?" Sai asked calmly. "Tenten will be avenged." And as soon as the boy said that, Sai's hand stilled. He let the red ink bottle fall on the ground, before moving to grab a green one. He will suffer for what he did. Damn you and your ink, you unyouthful fellow. What is in this thing? Rock Lee exclaimed as he kept on trying to remove the ink from his eyes. Sai didn't close in to attack, because he was sure his opponent could still react. Furthermore, moving would probably worsen his internal bleeding. Then I can't let you do that, Sai whispered. Your life ends here. The green bottle fell on the ground uncorked, and as its ink merged with the red one, it formed a dark brownish tint that naturally disappeared with the dirt of the arena. The boy finally cleansed his eyes and took up a fighting posture, before exclaiming, I will have mercy upon you, but I will not show the same towards your teammate. And then Rock Lee charged through. Tenten was my teammate. She was my friend. The moment the green spandex genin charged, the brown ink rose in reaction in the form of spikes. Sai jumped backwards just as the boy's hands were about to clasp against his throat. Was he trying to crush his windpipe? Even with his feet skewered, the boy still trudged on. If anything, his speed had simply increased. The youthful fire will win this battle. Yosh! The next hit slammed Sai on the ground before he could even think about dodging. The second and the third brought him to lose consciousness. And the fourth broke his other arm. Rock Lee panted with exhaustion as he slowly removed himself from the fallen foe. The fires of youth burned brightly in him, as the sweetest sensation of all settled in him, that of his perpetually burning muscles. It was a pain he had come to suffer from, and that he would suffer through the rest of his life. That pain, that continuous unending lingering pain was what made him immune to genjutsu. His sensei had told him it was the only way. He had trained harder than anyone else, done more than anyone else, and as long as he stood there, with his muscles enflamed and never calmed, he would be immune to what was truly debilitating for him. Rock Lee was the fire of youth. He roared to the skies one last yosh. Because the alternative was to scream from the utter unending pain. His weight's barbed hooks, which pierced his skin to ensure he would keep on feeling the pain in any moment of his time wearing them, could use some time cleaning, but he had a tournament to win. He'd care about infections later. Rock Lee is the winner. Medic Nins. Kakashi's order came abruptly, as the medic Chiryunin arrived to take care of the wounded. From above the stands, Mato Gai remained quiet throughout the entire exchange. He had seen death enough times to feel anything from it, but he could not let Rock Lee's words affect him throughout the rest of his life. He disappeared in a flicker of leaves, only to dash his way towards the medic Nin who was treating Rock Lee in a half-darkened hallway. The moment his student's eyes met his, tears began to stream down his face. Sensei. Rock Lee bawled as he pounced in for a bone-crushing hug. Tenten, she was killed, I have to. Rock Lee, Mato Gai whispered softly. That is not what Konoha is about. The fires of youth are not to be used for this bloody reason, to take a life, to claim one, it should be done with a true enemy. Surely, Tenten's death was unwanted and unwarranted, but you cannot stoop as low as her murderer. Just win this tournament, avenge Tenten by sparing your opponent's life, and you will have shown him the wrongness of his way. Sensei, tears streaked down Rock Lee's face. It hurts. It hurts more than the weights or the muscles. Why her? Why Tenten? Couldn't it have been someone else? I was the one supposed to die first, right? Why am I still here? Niji was defeated. Tenten is dead. Rock Lee, both of Mato Gai's hands clasped at the boy's shoulders. Look at me. Dark eyes met dark eyes, as sensei and student looked at one another firmly. Do not let your fires be tainted by anger. Do not let blood boil over their flames. They are a mean for salvation, not one for destruction. Do you understand me? Why Yosh, sensei? Rock Lee exclaimed. I can't hear you. Yosh, sensei. I can't hear you. Yosh, sensei. Rock Lee screamed loud enough to be heard even in the arena, just as Ryazetsu of Takigakuer surrendered after a brief bout of being apparently mind-controlled by the Otogakuer's kunoichi genjutsu skills. By the time Rock Lee returned to the contestant box, it was just to watch the form of Ryazetsu vanish out of the arena and that of the Otogakuer kunoichi to return to the box with a haughty smirk. Let us meet in glorious battle then, my enemy. he exclaimed, pointing his finger at the blonde boy's back who was descending in the arena. "I will show you the mercy of the fires of youth." His cerulean eyes turned to look at him with a cold stare, as suddenly behind his back the evanescent figure of a giant nine-tailed fox appeared, cast in an eerie crimson glow. Rock Lee was the only one to see it, but the sadistic grin the fox illusion depicted, it was enough to make him swallow nervously as the boy's words finally reached his ears. "And I will butcher you into tiny morsels to feast upon." Kuratsuka was not happy. Her grandfather's orders were, hypocrite, to say the least. He didn't want her to die, but at the same time was ready to sacrifice her for Uegaku's future. Considering that without her there simply wasn't a future for Iwa, the infighting between the other clans over who should rule was getting stronger with the passing of time. Then she simply had to survive. She had fought Han a few times, of course only with glancing blows and going all out. She knew how Jinhiriki battled. They had enormous reserves of chakra, nigh impenetrable cloaks made of their Baijirya's energy and some special ability depending on what Baijirya they held. The problem was that the Kyuubi's own abilities were unknown. Sure, it was renowned he could topple mountains and burn down forests, but it wasn't helpful. The Han's beast controlled steam, for he was the rage that boiled over and tore through. Rashi's own Baijirya was a thing of silence and flames, of erupting volcanoes and planned vengeance. They both used fire, but it was never alone, and always in conjunction with the rest of their skills. She supposed the Kyuubi was no different, but thankfully, earth and fire were things Uegaku or shinobi learned to fight against since birth, and all that without certain knowledge, which she still had. The moment the proctor raised his right hand, her own hands already were in the process of moving for the first of the hand signs. "We meet again," the blonde boy whispered with glee. His eyes were already turning crimson. "I'm going to enjoy this." "In your dreams, loser," Kuratsuka snapped back. The moment the hand of the proctor came down, she began the sign gestures one after the other with speed. She had trained an entire month to master this, the only way she knew of to counter the insane speed the boy possessed. An earth dome rose from the ground to entrap the boy, only it wasn't made of stone, but of jelly-like lime. Kuratsuka grinned as she finished the hand gestures, before immediately adding a blazing fireball from her mouth to burn the highly inflammable material she had concocted through the usage of her triple mastery in earth, fire, and water release. It was similar to the quicklime, but with this the boy was supposed to stay down, also because she couldn't muster the chakra to try it again even if she had a need for it. She breathed slowly as she watched the dome burn with everything within it. Maybe fighting fire with fire wasn't effective, but a constant heat over the chakra cloak of Han usually yielded the same result unless he had lied when he had told her about the after effects of a continuous usage of said Jinhiriki skill. "Well." The voice startled her. "Oh, let us burn him to ashes," the voice continued. "Like it's going to work. You know, if you really want to burn someone, you should be sure you are really aiming at him." She knew the voice came from behind her. She tried to claw her way in the ground, but before she could even manage to merge more than her ankles, he grabbed her with his giant claw-like chakra appendage, pulling her out and throwing her in midair. "And to ensure it burns good and steady," the voice continued, "you should make double sure it can't dodge, like when in midair." She spun around in the air long enough to see the boy smile at her, before his chakra-like fox face opened its mouth to roar and unleash a stream of crimson fire in her direction. She went through hand signs faster than ever, generating a strong stream of water that slammed against the upcoming fire stream. The momentum swung her away from the Jinhiriki, forcing her feet to land on the side walls of the arena. She took a single deep breath, before narrowing her eyes. He was toying with her. She was going to show him what it meant. She had spent a month trying to come up with ways of defeating him and him alone. She wasn't going down without a fight. Naruto's eyes flickered with amusement over that pathetic example of determination. He could hear her breathing steady. Had she another plan? The shining examples of death and murder that were shinobi and kunoichi always made him smile. In the end, wasn't he their supreme aspiration? They all wanted to fight and kill, to become better at fighting and killing, so who was he to be any less? He chuckled as he watched her extract a bundle filled with steel wire and caltrops. Was she really expecting those to work? He felt a tug in the back of his brain and snarled. Was it that difficult to understand? He was showing the world who was the weapon of Konoha. He was showing them that the enemy deserved no mercy. He was their weapon, and they had to fear him and respect him. Fear and power ruled more men than smiles and mercy. Stop this. He shook his head. Enough. Shut up. He snarled to himself as he decided to end this, before someone else got some strange ideas out of it. The Kyuubi was more a friend to him than to the real Naruto, albeit, was he actually real? No, he was just another side of him. There wasn't a real Naruto. They both were, and he was the strongest and the most fit for this duty, and thus he was the one in charge. The sewer-like mind of Naruto was starting to fill once more with torn limbs and blood, as the boy himself was fighting them off with a kunai. He ducked and rolled to avoid skeletal-like appendages firing their bone fingers, parrying with his kunai when a humongous amount of rotten flesh slammed against him and sent him to crash against the stone wall. Naruto jumped in midair, his feet attaching themselves to an overhanging pipe as he growled at the mass of putrefying limbs. Hatred, malice, cruelty, malevolence, all words to define the same core sentiment, the Kyuubi intoned from his cage. Do you not find it funny, Naruto? So many words for the simple action of hating one another. Can't you help? And why would I? The Kyuubi remarked. This is you. The rotting flesh, the despair, the hatred and the revenge, you'd make my brother proud. Such misery and such loath-filled intents, they are majestic to watch. But it isn't me. He replied as he jumped away from an incoming giant limb, who tore the pipe apart and sprayed scathing water everywhere. It is you. Everything here is you. The Kyuubi roared in laughter. From the hanging pipes to the water. From the sewer to the rotten limbs. All that is here is yours. Maybe not yours to command, but undoubtedly, it is yours. Naruto gritted his teeth as he twisted in midair, bringing down his tanto and cutting through a small mass of limbs. He landed once more in the water, using chakra to remain on balance. Bring me your blood. A voice snarled from the depths of the sewer's corridors. I will feast upon your entrails. And Naruto? Better make him forget, it wouldn't do. Naruto's eyes widened briefly, as a rotten hand pierced through his stomach and passed straight through. No distractions, Naruto. The Kyuubi remarked. Fight till you drop tired and deceased, beneath the gaze of the cursed eye of the Uchiha. No Uchiha used that eye on me. Naruto screamed back with blood in his mouth, as he ran backwards to avoid a geyser of blood and broken bones that would have skewered him alive. This is all your own doing. Pathetic mortal. The Kyuubi's roar burst through with a powerful gale that washed away the rot and the malice from the water for but a single instant. I am the reason you have not drowned in your sorrow before. His tails crashed against the gates. And this seal is the reason I have let you live. I can be born again, time and time again. I am immortal, a god, unbound by all but death itself. So remember my words, you avoid this misery because of I. Not because you hold some sort of power, but to the cursed I have to bow for that much I declared openly to whom once I considered my friend. I would have squashed it beforehand otherwise. The Kyuubi growled as the rot began to form again through the walls, making a few slowly tear themselves apart as holes and sick-looking flowers began to sprout. Do you think yourself happy, Naruto? Happiness is so much overrated, the Kyuubi replied. There is no such thing as a man without sorrow, as a living being without hatred, and yours has always existed deeply rooted within you. The loneliness of being alone, that misery morphed in blood-curdling vengeance. Look around, this rot, this stench, it is yours. Not mine, yours. The eye brought it out, but it was never mine to begin with. And the Kyuubi laughed wickedly. Tear apart the seal and I will deal with it personally, or leave the seal be and suffer for as long as the cursed eye stands. Can you dare blind an eye you know nothing of? Can you dare look into the malice of the world and come out unscathed? Naruto shuddered, as his breathing grew ragged. He held to his wound that wasn't real but felt like it. He wielded weapons he hadn't possessed but had called to the front in his moment of need. He was in his mind, but would that be enough? How? He screamed back. There is one last fail-safe, the Kyuubi replied smugly. One single last step before my freedom, one last line of ink written on a scrap of parchment attached to the seal by your mother, in her last moments of sanity. It belonged to her seal, and now it belongs to yours too. It is the piece I loathe the most, the one I desire shattered and burned, destroyed forever. Do it, open the gate once more, face your ancestor, face her guilt and her sins, and that will suffice, if you're still in time of course. Don't listen to him. A voice echoed. Never listen to the Cuabai, N. Shut up. Karama roared. You have done your part in these sins. Look at the misery wrought upon the boy because of your choice. In the end, you and you alone are the true culprit. You discovered how to seal us, and you sealed us to ensure a peace that could not last without us. What we did freely and unchecked you forced upon us with shackles made of ink. So what if millions will die upon our release? So what if billions will forever hold the day of my freedom to their memories as a day of horror and ghastly death? What needs to be done must be done. The Cuabai smirked. Isn't that what it means, to be a shinobi? To endure for the sake of the many? Tell me, Naruto, does the world count as many if the ones who have to endure are just a few villages? Naruto watched the seal. It was so far away it wasn't even funny. How had he managed to distance himself so much? It wasn't possible, was it? Don't trust him. The voice, female, shot again. Go back. Go away. He's diverting your attention from. I said to be silent. Naruto. The voice, he remembered the voice. Wasn't it Tukas? Hey Tuka-san. It was, his voice, younger, cheerful. You should listen to me, Naruto. The Cuabai's voice burst forth in the midst of his eavesdropping on something happening further down the sewer's halls. Last time you didn't, you paid the price. You shouldn't be out this late at night, Naruto. Tuka's voice was speaking softly. Ma, I'm just, well, I went to buy paint, yeah, Dadabia. No making pranks. Naruto's eyes shone with recognition. Hadn't that been the day? Naruto. Watch out. Why you? There was a low growl in his voice. You will pay for this. And Naruto. And the sound of broken bones echoed soon afterwards. I did this. His voice was verging on the despair when he heard it again. Even the rotting limbs had stilled, waiting as if ready to attack him. No, Tuka-san. Tuka-san. Answer me, please, please answer me. His brain pulsed in pain. How had he seen Tuka die with a snapped neck, if he hadn't even opened the can of paint? No, he had opened it. No, he hadn't. He had. He had not. He had. Why you, he choked out, his eyes teary as he looked at the Cuabai's form who merely smirked and swished his tails. It was you. I am and will always be bound, the Cuabai remarked calmly. But when malice, hatred is rampant, when evil lurks beneath the surface, I can emerge slightly. The fox chuckled. I could have saved the man you loved like a father, but would that have changed anything? No. You would have gone on believing the world a good place, a fun place, maybe you would have ended up believing we could be friends. The Cuabai snorted. We will never be friends, Naruto. I have a duty to uphold, one older than the world itself. You are a speckle of dust, lost in the countless eras of time I will be whole again, Naruto, the Cuabai whispered. My brethren will be one and together we will rise to what the sage wished for us to be. We will become a new form, a new being. You tricked me. He screamed back. I am the nine-tailed fox. The Cuabai roared back with glee. And you are just a mere mortal, Kurama remarked calmly. Would you condemn the entire world for your selfishness? Of course you would, I forgot. You sacrificed Ino Yamanaka for your happiness. You sacrificed your own sensei for your own beliefs. You sacrificed everyone around you to keep my voice, my whispers a secret, and those who died when you did not heed my words. The tally is rising, Naruto, and it will only rise further. If I have to work alongside that accursed eye to make you see the evil you are bringing, then so be it. And as one, the rotten flesh manifested as a mockery of the Ichibai itself. The halls of the sewer enlarged and cracked, as if there was a strain to withhold such a power, such strength. What? The Cuabai snickered. You thought the Ichibi's power could be held behind the seal? No, I was waiting for this moment, Naruto, he laughed as sand covered the landscape. I was waiting for this instant where, in public, you will unleash me against the unsuspecting masses. Let war ravage the land. Let death, let it be my revival. Naruto's right hand clenched in a fist, as the boy's eyes settled on the shambling corpse of the Ichibi. Why do this to your brother? My brother is no longer among the living, Kurama replied. He sacrificed his own soul to me. What I did, I devoured his soul. Do you know what it means, mortal? The fox's crimson orbs settled on him. I erased him from the cycle of rebirth, I erased him from the chance for heaven or hell. I removed him from the fabric of existence, he will never be born again, he will never be at peace. Forever, he will suffer within myself and be merged with myself in the end, and you know what? The fox chuckled. He chose that fate, rather than remain in the land of the living, in your land, because he felt the wind change, he felt a misery larger than before ready to come crashing down. You are doomed, Naruto Uzumaki. May you be the last of your accursed clan to ever be able to hold me, and may you never be reborn upon this rotten world. The Ichibi's corpse roared as sand hands dashed forward to grasp at Naruto. And now, Naruto Uzumaki. The fox's own mouth opened as a streak of fire crashed through the gate itself, to meld with the sand and form shards of glass that floated within the Ichibi's sand. It is time to die. Outside, Naruto Uzumaki's body was in a foul-feeling chakra of a black color, with four tails moving furiously in the air. A light sprinkle of sand had begun to rise and surround his body, as his face morphed into a mock laugh. He pointed his clawed hand towards Kurotsuke, who was now holding two parchments, one per hand. The Uegaku Kunoichi breathed out slowly, and then she jumped down with speed. Chakra enhanced her muscles as she unclasped both scrolls at the same time. Let's see you survive this. Kurotsuke roared, as the twin scrolls detonated and released in the air both sand and thin metallic fragments. The girl's mouth was soon rounded and filled, before she emptied a molten stream of magma straight through the particle cloud. The detonation that ensued soon followed with more, each of varying intensity and form as Kurotsuke herself insisted upon reigniting every now and then the cloud of dust. Kakashi had taken refuge up on the stands, as the explosions of magma and the shrapnel finally winded down. Kurotsuke was panting and breathing hard, but she still wasn't down. Sweat descended her brow, and her pink eyes narrowed to try to gleam at the figure of the Jinhuriki. When the dust settled, the Jinhuriki was no longer there. She exhaled, and in that moment, four tails slammed into her stomach. She expected chakra to be a soft surface. She was wrong. Her back crashed against the wall of the arena with an unsettling amount of force, as the body armor she wore literally snapped and creaked from the pressure. She felt her bones pulverize and blood pool in her mouth as her eyes began to cloud. The demonic figure was standing there, where she had been before. She blinked, and he was suddenly face to face with her. Seen from close, the face was horrendous. She narrowed her eyes with what little effort she had, and then she spat out on the face of the Jinhuriki. The saliva simply fizzled away upon his skin, and just as he was about to bite down on her throat, he stilled. You are outmatched, outsmarted, outnumbered, the Kyuubi droned out calmly, surrender and it will be quick and painless. Were you ever straight with me? Were your words true in the end? I never lied, the Kyuubi replied calmly. I am not lying now. Your own self-preservation instinct is stronger than the will to benefit your entire race. Isn't that quite the definition of selfishness? Are you a selfish boy, Naruto-kun? The fox winked once, snickering as spears of glass burst into fragments tearing through Naruto's guard and making the boy bleed. Selfishness is bad, and bad boys need to be punished, Kurama added. You know, I never understood you humans. Why can you be so stupid? The world doesn't revolve around you. You don't even have a soul. You coined that term to define something you don't possess. The spark of intelligence isn't something all mythical or mystical. Heck, it's just the sapience. The ability to think doesn't make you superior to others, just different. You are different from a dog, you aren't superior to him. You really can't declare a fish useless because he can't climb a tree now, can you? There was a moment of silence as Naruto stilled and croaked back. So what, I should just die? Lay down and let you kill me? Why would I do that? Because the good of the many outweigh the good of the few, it's logical. The Kyuubi nodded. And, let me tell you this, you've already lost. Do you think they'll let you die of old age? You'll be used up and then the beast will be extracted into a new host, a younger one, a better one. And it was then that Naruto's eyes widened a fraction. Wait, he mumbled. The next instant, the kunai was at his throat. The attacks ceased in that precise split second. The Kyuubi actually growled with hatred that made Naruto's knees get weak. So that's how it is, Naruto breathed hard. It's not about killing me. It's about, what, absorbing me? Getting me to remove the seal in an offer of peace? You really don't want to die and be reborn, do you? The process has been wasted long enough. The time it would take for me to return, the weakened state, the world cannot afford that, the Kyuubi spoke calmly. And let's face it, Naruto, you can't win. No, he whispered. You're right, but I can damn well stall for time, can I? Are you sure about that? The Kyuubi remarked with a smirk. Very well. The Ichibai corpse disappeared, as well as the rest of the rotten limbs or the shards of glass, with a powerful bark and a roar. The eye of the main Jakyusharinon was shattered to little pieces as Naruto's surroundings returned to the real world. His face gazed at the pink eyes of Kurotsuki, who was standing on the ground with blood dribbling down her mouth. Never, fuck with my team again, he whispered hoarsely, as he staggered back up from his slightly prone position. Eventually, Naruto. The Kyuubi whispered to his ear, I will force you to open the seal, I will just have to change my means then. You're a bastard, Naruto hissed back as Kakashi declared him the winner. And you lied. Ah, I never said I couldn't. The Kyuubi chuckled. I said I would not. So why should I trust you again? You tasted my powers for long enough, Naruto, Kurama replied. Do you think that once you have tasted the nectar of my chakra, you can live without? Let's see how long you will fare, before you plead for my help this time. And what if I'm about to die? When that happens, the Kyuubi hissed, I will claim your weakened mind for myself. And to that, Naruto shuddered, because in the back of his mind he could feel the looming presence of the Ichibi's own strength, and that power, that strength, it was not sealed inside the Kyuubi. Next match, Rock Lee against Taewa from Otagakure. In the drowning sound of the crowd's applause, probably because now Rock Lee was the hero, and he the enemy, Naruto couldn't help but feel bitter as he was hastily dismissed by the medic Nin. He was about to enter the contestants' box, when his sensei's form appeared quickly in a flicker. Naruto. Her voice was actually stressed as she spoke, forcing Naruto to tense and still. Sei. Sakura. Her voice trailed off for a moment. What about her? His sensei seemed conflicted, crossing her arms over her chest as she looked like she was fighting an inner demon of her own. She's, Yojao exhaled slowly. She's going to stay at the hospital a bit more, the woman finally replied. But she'll be fine. He smiled back at his sensei. At least, something good, right? Yeah, the Umbu schooled her features. At least. Yojao watched her student leave for the contestants' box, and clenched her right hand only after he had left. How could he tell him, after all, that Sakura Haruno had been found having bitten and clawed to death her very own parents? She was going to make Anko pay for this. Even if it was the last thing she did, even if she had to face execution because of it. She was going to make her pay. Or she would die trying. Check the description for the links to the author.